Meeting of the Lake Bluff Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals. Agenda item number 1, call to order and roll call, please.
Certainly, Member Burns. Here. Member Danley.
Here.
Member Miller.
Here.
Member Murray.
Here.
Member Ryder.
Here.
Member Russell was originally hoping to join us electronically. He was having a family issue, but then unfortunately has escalated. He's unable to join us. I do have a remark of his to read a little later, but he apologizes that he cannot join the proceedings this evening. And, of course, Chair Peters.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, non-agenda items and visitors' public comment time. During each meeting, we allocate 15 minutes for the public to speak on issues that are not necessarily on the agenda. Just based upon comments that we received earlier this evening, it appears that there might be a couple of individuals who, for time constraints, would like to present very quickly to the board. So please address the board.
Thank you.
If you could state your name for the record and your home address, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Robert Isham, 134 East North Avenue, Lake Bluff, Illinois. And thank you very much, Commission. I can't stay for the presentation, which I regret. I have something planned, and this week I am jammed up probably like a lot of people. So I was hoping, and I haven't, unfortunately, familiarized myself with your whole process, but I'm certainly hoping that this process will be obviously considered and maybe placed on the agenda after the new year, when people have maybe more discretionary time at their disposal. And I would also request that this commission or committee actually take into full consideration the last 2 reviews of the projects that were proposed for this piece, because many of the issues will be the same, I believe. And unless the issues here, the circumstances are so materially different, or that the project is so materially different than, let's say those prior 2 proposals, that this commission is in essence bound by those prior decisions, if not legally or strictly, but at least by common principles of estoppel and equity. So I would ask you to do that. And that's my comment, and I appreciate you giving me the discretion to make them. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. Gary Lawrence, 362 West Prospect Avenue, Lake Bluff. Also co-owner of the property that goes from 103 to 113 East Scranton. Leggy Bird Design, Lawrence Interiors, and Bluffingtons. Our family has owned our building since 1979, and I just briefly, because I have to go back to work to frame pictures again, I just briefly wanted to speak in support of this project at the old PNC Bank. We've had our building, like I said, since '79. We've had numerous opportunities where people have asked us to turn our apartments into office space. We've heard we could get more rent if we were to do that, everything else. And all we've thought about is what happened in downtown Lake Forest when they turned all the spaces in Market Square into offices. The place is dead. We really enjoy the fact that we have people and residents living upstairs. We have 2 one-bedroom apartments, a 2-bedroom apartment, and a 3-bedroom. And I just think it's great for the community to have that buzz in the downtown area. So regarding this project, I'm happy to see the fact that it's all residential and not office space, that type of thing. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Anyone else in the public comment time? All right, hearing none. Agenda item number 3, consideration of the November 20, 2019 PCZBA special meeting minutes. Have we all had an opportunity to review those minutes?
Yes.
Any proposed revisions?
I had one, and I'm trying to find the exact page, but rather than pull it up, we had one comment where I think we have a word wrong. Of course, now I'm going to completely space where it was. But I think what we basically said was, when we were talking about Block 3, I think when we had one word substitution, when we were talking about, I'll submit it via email. I apologize. But there's one that just changed the meaning, kind of reversed it backwards. So I'll find it and bring it up.
Okay, thank you, Member Murray. Any other comments from the commissioners? Hearing none, could we have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Agenda item number 4, consideration of the October 30, 2019 PCZBA special meeting minutes. Again, have we all had an opportunity to review those minutes?
Yes.
Any proposed revisions? Hearing none, could we have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
I abstain, I wasn't there.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Fifth agenda item is to administer the oath to those participating in public hearings tonight. As you may be aware, we only have one public hearing. That involves 700 Malman Avenue. The remainder of the evening will be spent on a workshop, which is not a formal public hearing. So anyone who wishes to testify during the public hearing for 700 Malman, please stand up and raise your hand. Okay. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you, sir. You may be seated. All right. Agenda item number 6, public hearing for 700 Malman Avenue, residential bulk variation issue. Mr. Cole, if you wanted to provide an overview, please.
Certainly, so we will keep the overview very brief. I know that the builder from this matter, Carl, is here to present to us, but in essence, this is only a 4-area ratio variation for this existing property. They're proposing to keep the property much as it is, but they would add a 1-story addition and then a smaller addition on the 2nd story. They say that that's necessary to fix essentially 3 problems with the home. There's some roof line issues. There's some difficulties with the interior floor plan, especially as it goes upstairs. And then on the 2nd story, there are a bedroom that's only accessible through another bedroom. So in their letter, they assert that these small changes would help overcome some of these hardships, make a more functional house. Unlike many issues that come before the PCZBA, this one is of a small magnitude, I believe around 11%, such that it's within your authority to issue the approval or the denial. Typically, for most of our issues, those would go to the village board. They require relief that's too large. So your approval would be, we recommend, in the form of the draft order and resolution you have before you. I'm happy to answer any procedural questions, or we can have the applicant present.
If you could, sir, state your name for the record and your address, please.
Carl Strasburger, 1004 West Old Mill Road, Lake Forest. Good evening, Board. I'm here on behalf of Paul and Megan McIntyre at 700 Malman Avenue. We're requesting a variance approximately about 380 square feet at the rear end of the house, which is the hatched area back here. The site plan will all the setbacks, the front setback and the south setback and the rear setback all comply. We do have an existing north setback that's shy of the required, but it's an existing wall that's to remain. We are under the allowable for impervious and house area as well. But all the addition is in the rear and limited on the front exposure. These are 2 pictures of the existing house. On the front, which is the top one, you have 2 dormers flanking the entrance. We have an asphalt roof, we have siding existing. We will be doing new windows and new siding to the project. On the rear, you'll see that there's an asymmetrical gable here from a previous addition. We also have a water issue that saddles between the one-story and two-story plan here. Okay, so what we have in the next series is elevations. We have existing and then proposed. So the top is the existing, and below is our proposed. I'm sorry, I'm hitting the wrong one all the time. So we got a dormer that we want to add in the center. You'll see that we're relocating the stair, which is one of the main problems of the floor plan. We also would like to do a dormer that kind of adds symmetry to the right side over the garage. For the rear elevation, again, we have this asymmetrical gable from a previous project, and then the trap of water that occurs in here. So our main addition is really occurring right in here. We're proposing, a typical gable for the garage, and then we have a dormer element that's below a breakfast window. We do have our daylight plane that's shown over here, and you'll see on the elevation that we're at approximately 10'9" on our daylight on a required, or not to exceed 20. Again, all the windows and asphalt roof and siding will be replaced as well. This is north elevation. You'll see the daylight plane right here, and that's your 10'9" dimension. Here again, we went to more of a traditional roof at the garage front to back, and then this portion is the extension of the garage and mudroom. When you look at the existing floor plan, the house originally was right here without the family room and bathroom. And that's probably the main reason the stair is in its position, is it was on an exterior wall. So at the moment, you're walking in and you have to go into the living room and either go down and then back up to get to the family room, or you have to go through the kitchen and around. So the primary deficiency of the floor plan is the location of the stair as it segments the main rooms. The kitchen is very small in this location. There's one closet here. There's really no mudroom or closet area, and from the garage, you have to go outside and back into the house. So those are your deficiencies on the first floor. What we're proposing is relocating the stair to the center in a more traditional fashion, being able to open, a common path through the house from the living to the family to the kitchen. We're essentially closing this alcove, it's on the outside of the house, which is really just a very dark three-sided, area that our addition now is going to be coming across here, and allows us to enlarge the kitchen in this area, the family in the powder room. The bathroom gets shortened to a powder room, and then we have a breakfast area followed by a direct access from the garage into the mudroom area closets, and then into the house. When you get to the second floor, you'll notice that this is the stair existing, and to get to this bedroom, you essentially have to go through the bedroom to get to this one. And it's critical to have 4 bedrooms with the family size and so forth. So relocating the stair to here and entering into the same primary vestibule that was there allows us to get a hallway and then have an independent bedroom to the south. Another deficiency is the laundry room, only laundry room, is like through the master bath area. So redoing the master and then relocating the laundry so it's independent was a critical factor too. The area upstairs is roughly 100 extra square feet added, and then this first floor is approximately 277 feet. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
You know how old the original house is when it was built?
I don't know the exact time, but I would say 1960s is primary, but the addition was, I'm not positive, but the family room and that extra bathroom probably came in the 90s, and, it gave them more on the first floor, which was critical, because essentially the two rooms that were the primary were really, this living room is really like 12 feet wide, and then you have the dining, so you have this lower level room you had to step down to, so it was critical to put these two rooms on. But in hindsight, there were still deficiencies when it came to the kitchen, and, and that's where the stair issue became an issue, because of, it was situated correctly when it was first a two-bedroom with a ensuite. And then when the family room came into position, or in the master, we ended up with the conflict and pretty much a floor plan that's pretty difficult to, work around, so.
Have the neighbors expressed any concerns? I didn't see any here.
The
in the
north
package.
neighbor has had dialogue with the McIntyres and has had no issue with it. And certainly, we want to make sure the addition didn't encroach any further into any of the existing setbacks. And on that side, because it's shy of the 5 feet, but it's an existing condition, the addition itself is over 5 feet away. And the north neighbor is satisfied with what we've done.
I guess one of the standards for variation is addressing whether or not it's merely special privilege or is not merely special privilege. And how would you address that, sir?
Well, I think the deficiency of the floor plan is probably there is some exterior issues with drainage and so forth, but I think primarily it's, not having access to a bedroom. The other is the kitchen, or the first floor has one closet, it has no mudroom, no laundry, and you're really traveling upstairs, or you just have no closet space, and in our day and age, the kitchen is one of the most important areas, and certainly we congregate there, our activities are there. The family room certainly has made its way to the size it wants, but besides that, all the other rooms, or at least are very modest, and certainly, in our time with mudroom and storage, going from the garage outside back in, and certainly the alcove, or this little niche that's been created by, the family room. I mean, this is just a dark well, and it certainly had a natural sense of filling that in, and then certainly gaining the advantage of a stronger layout and larger kitchen. On the second floor, the number one was really moving the stairs so we can, get access to another bedroom. That's, was the key.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners?
I have two questions. One, is there a basement?
Yes.
Is that functional?
There is an older, they have the older existing basement, where the original house is. Okay, where are we here? It's not off. Under the family room, when they built that, there's a basement there as well. But the short basement at 710 is the primary basement when you're going down the center of the house, or where the existing stair is now. So when you go down the stair and go to the back of the house, you get to the family room. That is the same size basement, but the original is with beams. It's pretty shallow. It's usually ends up at around a 7'6", 7'10".
So is the same staircase you're moving going to go downstairs as well? Where's that staircase going to be?
Yes, it's it's right where the kitchen is, right, sir, right here. So the door to the basement down and turn. Right now, it's going down here, and you end up right in this area. This is the new newer basement. But yes, you'd go downstairs from that door right in the kitchen.
And my second question is to the board, or to Glenn. What about, you said there was no flood, there's no water impact, impermeable surface problems, correct?
Correct. I mean,
So
we're
my
not
question
adding
is-
any for the driveway or walkways.
So my
Yes, you
question
know.
is, do they have to put that retention area that we always talk about when there's new construction?
Certainly. So I will say we didn't have an extensive conversation about this at the staff level about that particular question. Typically, this isn't the size where we would impose this.
I see.
By and large, the property drains from the back to the front, so it's not really extending anything into the natural flow of drainage aside from what's already there. If that were required, we would impose this part of our
Okay.
building permit.
And is there any drainage problems in the basement now?
I believe there was, but it was repaired
Remediated.
previously, and going down there, I didn't find any at this time.
Okay. Well, my personal opinion is that you do have a hardship based on the current plan of the house. So I don't see that to be a difficult decision with that piece of the request.
Thank you, Member Miller. Any other comments from the commissioners? Hearing none, do we have a motion? Oh, any comment from the public? All right. Yeah, at this juncture in the proceedings, then it's whether or not there's a motion to approve or a motion to deny the requested relief or motion to approve with possible conditions. Is there a motion, please?
Motion to approve the request.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, if we could have a vote, please, Mr. Cole.
Certainly. The order is random. Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Ryder,
Aye.
Member Murray,
Aye.
Member Burns,
Aye.
Member Danley,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much for your approval.
All right. Agenda item number 7 is a workshop for Block 3 of the Central Business District to discuss a possible 20-unit condominium redevelopment of the former PNC bank site. Before we get into the presentation, I wanted to go over a few general ground rules with everyone. Number 1, we're going to place a time allocation on individual comments of 4 minutes, but for the petitioner. I think that will give everybody an opportunity to certainly speak. Number 2, we do understand, obviously, that there can be many, many divergent opinions with respect to this issue. And so we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be heard, that everybody has an opportunity to make a record, and that we can have as much information as possible from the public and from the prospective developers as possible. Number 3, civility is going to be of critical importance. We did quite well when we discussed this issue in November. I think we can do better this time around. So we will not tolerate any interruptions. There won't be any personal attacks. There won't be any negative inferences. There won't be any clapping or shouting or any other outward expressions. It's going to be conducted professionally in accordance with the philosophy of the Village of Lake Bluff. The process will be that Mr. Anderson and his colleague will present. The public will then have an opportunity to make their presentation. During the course of the presentation by Mr. Anderson and his colleague, certain board members may feel like it's appropriate to ask a question or two, and I think we will allow that. But then we'll go into the public comment section, and then we'll go back to the commissioners for further discussion with Mr. Anderson and his team staying here for the process.
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Brad Anderson. I live at 511 East Prospect Avenue in Lake Bluff. I want to thank you all for allowing us to come back for a second time for this informal presentation. We presented a lot of material last time, and we listened to the comments of the commission. We reread the minutes from the meeting to try to clarify in our minds what the main issues were. And then we reached out to a couple of the neighbors as well since the last meeting and met with them. So you know, I did reach out to Mr. Neistat before this process ever began and asked him on 2 separate occasions to meet with me, and he did not feel so inclined to meet. But anyways, what I plan to do is just give a little bit of a review of some of the items I presented last time for the benefit of the people here that weren't here last time. And then we've got some additional information that was developed in response to the comments we heard. So we're just starting this with the idea of, 120 Scranton Avenue condominiums. Why should we have condominiums in Lake Bluff? We've got information about case studies showing how the property values of adjacent neighbors should not be negatively impacted, and then the whole planning process that kind of brought us here. So as I stated before, Lake Bluff is an aging community. 39% of the residents in Lake Bluff are between the age of 50 and 79 years old. In the greater Chicago metropolitan area, the average age is about 10 years younger. Only 29% of the residents are in that older age group of 50 to 79. Before I start this next slide, I guess I should expand on the last one. And the reason that we feel there's a need for condominiums in Lake Bluff is that there aren't any. There's one condominium within the CBD that has a bedroom on the entry level. And if you look at neighboring communities to the south and to the west, the CBDs are typically surrounded, because of planning processes, with condominiums close to downtown. Back in 1994, and several of you weren't here last week or last month, there was a survey done of every resident, every household in Lake Bluff received a survey. One of the questions in the survey packet, which I found compelling when I was selling real estate early on in my career, was a question of how long do you plan to live in Lake Bluff? Over 30% of the respondents, and it's 30% of over 50% of the households, responded that they want to live in Lake Bluff through retirement. And I found that to really be compelling about how much people care about Lake Bluff. They care about it enough that they want to stay in Lake Bluff beyond raising children, beyond putting kids through school. They want to stay in Lake Bluff through retirement, much like I do, and many people I know do. So then fast forward to 1997 when the comprehensive plan was adopted, and I was a plan commission member back in 1997 and helped author this study. One of the objectives was to encourage development of alternative housing within the community and encourage the development of multifamily housing options within the CBD. Even back in 1997, we realized that there was a lack of this type of housing in the community as a whole, but specifically within the central business district or within close proximity of it. So I won't read all of this off, but in 2015, TESCA, an independent advisory company, was hired to do a vision study about Block 3 and the central business district. And among other things, they talked about a strong preference expressed for multifamily housing in town. Maximum building height should be 3 stories. Upper floor setbacks are encouraged. All the things that are included in what Peter Whitmer put together in his architectural renderings that you'll see in a few minutes. And then flash forward to 2020, or the strategic plan for 2023, and again, it's called out that condominiums are encouraged and diverse housing implementation for residents in all stages of life. And it's our belief that this building as designed would attract the demographic I first spoke of, the older generation desiring to stay within the village through retirement. And again, this just reiterates my previous point. There's one unit right next door at 64 East Center that's a condominium building with it has one bedroom and it's on the first floor. So last month, there was some discussion about if people want to stay in Lake Bluff, close to downtown, maybe they should just move into one of the ranches. There's a lot of inventory on the market, and there's lots of choices. Now, even though most real estate studies show that people downsizing, or right-sizing as we call it now, and when they're empty nesters, it's not just the idea of living on one level, but it's the idea of living in a maintenance-free dwelling where you're not worried about maintaining the house or the lawn or the upkeep of a single-family home. And in East Lake Bluff, there's really only 4 ranch homes currently available. None of them are in the price range of what's being proposed. So Member Murray asked a great question, and I didn't really process it that night. But he asked this, and I think it's a very poignant question. He said, how will this development benefit anyone other than the 20 condo unit owners? And there was some discussion about the fact that we've got a declining housing market, and there might be 20 people moving out of their single-family homes at one time to move into this condo building, 20 houses coming on the market, and you'll see in a subsequent slide that this all won't happen in 1 year, and likely there'll be people from out of Lake Bluff moving into these units. But more importantly than that, and we brought this up last month, Peter brought it up last month, when people decide to leave their house, they're going to leave their house. The question is, are they going to leave their house and stay in the village of Lake Bluff, or are they going to leave their house and move out of state, or move to Lake Forest, or move to another community nearby because they no longer want to be in that single-family residence. So among other, included in this answer are, we think that this development will complete and define the central business district. It'll be a bookend for Block 1 with Block 3. Block 1 has a 3-story building, though most people walking by it, and my office is there, don't even perceive it as a 3-story building because the 3rd floor is set back. And from ground level, both in Block 1 and on this proposed development on Block 3, visually from the street level, you don't see the 3rd story. This development will clean up a vacant eyesore in the CBD. The site where the PNC building is now has been vacant for 6 years. It's undeveloped, it's overgrown with weeds, and it's, I think, just really a blight on really what is a very beautiful downtown otherwise. We believe the development will add value to the surrounding properties, and I'll show you these slides again that demonstrates that. And it will provide, as I said, a housing type desired by many Lake Bluff residents, some of whom are here tonight. And it'll also add much needed tax revenue to the village. And I can tell you this as a real estate professional, the number one question, or the number one concern people have buying houses after finding the type and style of house they're looking for is what are the taxes? And we're compared every day to Lake Forest because we have very similar communities. but our tax rate in Lake Bluff is higher. And it's because we don't have as great a population of residents or commercial businesses in town to support it.
Still the second lowest in Lake County.
Sorry, what?
Still the second lowest in Lake County.
Second lowest on the North
Unfortunately,
Shore.
next to the lowest.
And it's worth every dollar of it, even though it's higher.
Well, thank you for saying
Believe
so,
me,
Brad.
I'm the biggest champion for Lake Bluff you'll ever know. So this is part of the fiscal analysis study that I think you all have a copy of now. But this shows the projected absorption rate of the condominiums in this building. There'd be a total of 5 occupancies in 2021, 7 occupancies in 2022, and the balance 8 more in 2023. So there won't likely be 20 units built, finished out, and closed on all in the first year of completion. I'd love to think it would happen, but the market just isn't that strong. And this is, I think, answering Commissioner Murray's question even more directly. You know, what benefit is this to the rest of the residents in Lake Bluff? With the increased tax revenue, the increased assessed valuation, there's going to be a $153,000 annual increase in tax revenues. $58,000 will go to District 65, $40,000 will go to the high school district, $20,000 to the park district, and $33,000 to the village and the library. And as we all know, looking at our tax bill, the preponderance, the majority of our tax bills, about 70%, is the schools. Yet in this building, though the analyst believes there might be 1 child in the building, I think I'd be surprised if there's 1. So the cost or the benefits of this to the village are huge. Over a 20-year period, there'll be an increase of over $2 million in tax revenue to the various taxing bodies. So these next slides are what we use as evidence to try to ease the concern of neighbors that a luxury condo building adjacent to their properties will decrease or diminish the value of their homes. And we looked at 3 Lake Forest projects. We had none to look at in Lake Bluff, so we took the most similar community next door. Peter Whitmer is currently developing a property or a condominium development on McKinley Road. There are existing condominiums on Oakwood Avenue where the Deer Path Inn is, and behind it, there's 2 other 3-story condominium buildings. And then the Kelmscott development, which is a new development in Lake Forest on Laurel and Western Avenue. So what we did is we drew a circle around the McKinley Avenue project that's currently under construction, 200-yard radius, and saw 5 recent home sales with an average price of $957,000, one over $3 million. On Illinois and Oakwood, you've got historic homes across the street from these 3 buildings. Recent sales, 7 recent sales of homes averaging $1 million, 3 currently on the market at about the same price. And Kelmscott, I think, is really the most compelling and really the best example of why I feel there's not going to be any negative effect on the value of neighboring properties. Kelmscott is a development of 3-story condominium buildings and apartment buildings. And the building that's pictured here is a 3-story a 3-story apartment building directly across the street from brand-new single-family homes that are being built and sold at prices approaching $2 million. So when you look at this, and this is our current market. People are willing to spend almost $2 million directly across the street from 3-story apartment buildings, not even owner-occupied. And then this is the current neighborhood that we're talking about. The average price in the neighborhood is $650,000 for the homes that have sold recently. And then this is the existing site conditions. And I think this is what's causing a diminishing effect on property values in the neighborhood currently, a vacant commercial site. I think even when the neighbors bought their houses here, I think all of the neighbors here, there was a functioning drive-through banks facility, either the Northern Trust or PNC Bank. And they bought their homes next to that commercial drive-through facility. And it didn't cause a lot of disruption. It wasn't a well-trafficked bank facility, at least in the last several years since Wintrust opened up. But it was a commercial site. And now that commercial site has turned into a vacant eyesore, which I really think is a blight, not only for the neighboring properties, but for everyone in town. As I show property in Lake Bluff as a realtor, and I drive people past this site, they're always wondering what is going on in Lake Bluff. Why hasn't this site been developed? And it just causes a question and causes a concern about the future of Lake Bluff when a site is sitting empty for as many years as this has. So now I'd like to bring Peter up. Peter is going to go through some of the changes he made to his plan, some of the benefits of the plan to the neighbors, and then we'll both be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. As Brad mentioned, since our last meeting, we've had a chance to meet with a few of the neighbors and really understand the site a little bit better and think about it and really reflect back on the comments that were in the meeting. The only thing I would add to Brad's presentation that we see in Lake Forest and we think about these projects is having people live in the CBD that use the CBD. And, you know, we struggle with restaurants in Lake Forest as we do in Lake Bluff, the same thing. And so we feel like the local merchants typically in these types of projects are pretty big users of the, you know, it's one of the reasons they move here or move in this kind of thing is that they can walk to the restaurants and walk and use the goods and services of the CBD. So, you know, I think that's another aspect that this project will attract. Its future buyers will be strong users of the businesses in the CBD. This is just the existing site, and you can see here, oops, I always have trouble with this. Most of it's paved, just to give you, and this is just the first site plan that we developed. And a couple of things that came up were, one is the space between the two buildings. We thought about that and really the inefficiencies of that space and really what does it do for our floor plans. And, you know, if we thought about it as one building, we could actually scoot and have more area on the, let's see, there we go, okay. So the space in between here, it really isn't that desirable and doesn't really benefit any of the exterior piece. And really you can only understand this is if you're standing right here that you see through. So our thought is if we take the buildings and we push them together, it would allow us to have more space on the Evanston Street side, which we felt was more appropriate for that in the residential neighborhood that's on this side. You know, we're pretty tight on the commercial space. So that was one of the ideas that we had. The other idea was, you know, what can we do to minimize the impact to the northern neighbors? So our thoughts were, we did some things for that. So this is where we currently are with the site plan. So we've actually moved the building closer together. We still have, this is the third floor plan plus the site plan. So now we have 19 feet off the property line to the east, and we've increased the back property line. We have 21 feet to the two-story portion, and then the step-back penthouse is actually 12 feet back here, so that we have further space to go back. The other thing that we really wanted to do is we wanted to pull the sidewalk away from the property line here, so it allowed us to have vegetation along the fence line, so it wasn't slammed against there. Also starting to think about the trees, and one of the big things that we talked about was getting rid of the power lines along this. And it's not only the visuals of the power lines and the transformers, it's the impact those power lines have on the landscape in the future. Because basically they need to get pruned so that they have standards that have to be met so that they don't fall onto the power lines. So by burying those, it allows us to plant trees really where they need to be in terms of minimizing the visual impacts to the neighbors to the north. This is the rendering that we showed last time, and this is the upper level that we were talking about here. And now we can see we've moved that back. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have this line, and you can see the piece back. So this is really, and we really think about this building as a two-story building with a penthouse that's stepped back. So that the streetscape is really a two-story massing with a third level that's pulled back from the street. Again, here we're just showing this is the pedestrian walkway between the two, having some ability to put some landscaping in this, and then these would be the entrances into the north-facing units. The other thing then we did is looked at the section. So this is the two sections through the building. One at the north end, or the west end, and one at the east end. And here it shows, this is the east end. This is the daylight plane that comes up. This is our two-story building with a penthouse step back in the center. You can see that we minimized the impact of that. This is the north property line here. This is where that power poles are right in this location. Again, this is the same section where they have the porches that are pushed back. This used to be out here. Now we've pushed the penthouse piece back at the corner so that we have some space here. And then we really think that the development of the landscape plan is critical to this, is all the projects that we do, making sure that trees have big enough space to grow. If you have a chance to see the trees that we planted when we did the 333 Westminster building, which is just a building north of the project that we're currently, the trees have grown past basically 4 stories high in the 10 years that we have, and really provide a substantial buffer between the two buildings. But they have enough space to grow. And so I think, with our 21-foot setback here and this being back, we really have enough space in here to have substantial landscape between the two properties. The next thing we were asked to do is look at the stormwater, and so we engaged our civil engineers to do that. I think everyone got a copy of this letter. And so he reviewed our plans that we currently have. And our impervious area is a little bit greater than what we currently have on the total site. It does not require to have any detention, but I think there's still opportunities to do that, as we talked about before, with pervious pavers in the patio areas, the possibility of having larger piping on our storm sewer system so it acts as a detention in that. And one thing they didn't mention, I think we could look at too, and we've done in other projects, is on the third floor where it steps back, having some roof garden areas to capture water on the roof. I think that's an added benefit for both not only the spaces up there, but also for the reduction in stormwater to the overall site. And then, again, I just showed some pictures of the downtown. I was really studying it, and really this idea of this two-story piece, strong element here, obviously is strong within this. And then the block one, obviously, with the two-story piece with the step-back penthouse. And I think our thoughts are this is even less and further back than what it is in block one, but really maintaining the idea of a two-story building with a step-back penthouse. So that's my presentation, and I'll turn it back over for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Whitmer. Why don't we transition to the public comment section now? If anyone wishes to address the commissioners and/or raise some additional questions for Mr. Whitmer or Mr. Anderson, now's the time. please. Yes, just approach the podium, sir, and state your name for the record. Thank you.
My name's Bob Gamreth. I live at 860 Carlisle Circle in Lake Bluff. I've lived here 37 years. I've seen a lot of changes in downtown Lake Bluff. This town has two treasures that need to be protected. One's the downtown business area, the other's the Bluff, and I'm talking about East Lake Bluff. The businesses in East Lake Bluff have a tough time. I think you know that. It's because we don't have enough residents in East Lake Bluff. A condominium like this brings in more residents within walking distance of Lake Bluff in the business district. I think everybody here knows the retail business are suffering, not just in Lake Bluff, but throughout the country. You have Amazon, young people, they both work, so they want to order things online. They don't go to stores like we used to. Lake Bluff's been very fortunate, in my view, that the businesses have survived as well as they have. If you look at East or West Lake Bluff, you've got three great anchors for your businesses there. You've got Heinen's, you've got Canals, and you've got Target. They are the anchors for that area. There aren't a lot of anchors on the east side of Lake Bluff. We need residents. And I believe this is a start. If you look at Lake Forest, they're struggling with Market Square. It's constant. There are 3 vacant storefronts right now in Lake Forest. And I think they understand that they need to do everything they can to keep that viable. And consequently, they have built 6 new condominium facilities. If you drive down Western Avenue, north side, it's solid condominiums and apartments within walking distance of Market Square. So they are trying to protect the businesses in Market Square. I'd like to see Lake Bluff do the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Certainly.
My name's Robin McAfee. I live at 100 East North Avenue. And the question I asked many times, the 18 months we went through this before, was why not 2 stories? And the answer was always, it's not financially feasible. And we knew that then, and we know that now. So I wonder why it's the residents of Lake Bluff's responsibility to make it financially feasible. I'm not that concerned with the value of my home. I bought in 2006. I bought at the height of the market. I'm not going to get back there. This is going to alter the character of Lake Bluff. My children are grown and gone. They're not going to ride their bikes to school down Oak Avenue anymore, past the new 40 residents who are pulling in and out. I work, my husband works, we're not home. It's not going to affect us that much, but it is going to change the character of the town. It's a giant block of a building in a mostly 2-story town. I know Block 1 has 3 stories, but it has a park on the other side of it, so it doesn't create a tunnel effect. I just think it really will change the character. We are 1/4 the size of Lake Forest. I don't think it's a fair comparison to compare us to Lake Forest. We are a small town, and that's what we bought into when we moved here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
See if this works.
Pretty
Thank you. Good evening. Mark Stolzenberg. Tonight I'll briefly touch upon several issues relating to the current proposal for Block 3 and why it doesn't work here in Lake Bluff. If approved, this development would have a substantial impact on the families who directly surround it. And it would send a message to developers that high-density development is acceptable in other areas of our community as well. Now, I think we can all agree that Lake Bluff is much different than Evanston, Winnetka, or even downtown Lake Forest. All are denser areas where this proposed development might be more acceptable, but not in the middle of our small village on a site that's surrounded by single-family homes. Now, going back to 2016, that proposal was similar to this one. That proposal was 36 feet tall and was effectively 2 buildings. Now, I understand that this proposal's been revised somewhat, but they're substantially the same. Now, to better understand, and this is the site as it exists today, to better understand the scale of the proposed development, both in 2016 and now, it might be helpful to have some comparison to what's there right now. The developer in 2016 didn't prepare a side-by-side comparison with the bank, but I did. Now remember, this proposal is taller. It may be over 40 feet per Mr. Whitmer's comments at the last meeting. So this was a comparison to the last proposal for Block 3. That's on the Scranton side, and that's on the Oak side. Now ask yourself, is this something I'd want to impose on my neighbor? Is this something I'd want towering over my own house? And if something of this magnitude goes up in Lake Bluff, how do we continue to set ourselves apart as a unique outpost in this increasingly developed region if we open the door to development like this that tower over our existing buildings and homes? What are we doing to preserve our way of life if we allow development of this magnitude? Now, it was those issues that were a principal driver of the 30-foot, 2-story limitation written into the PMD ordinance. That was a bargain struck by the village to balance the interests of developers and of residents. It would allow development while limiting the impact on the community, providing a transition between the central business district and the surrounding homes. And nothing has changed in the intervening 3 years to affect or revisit that bargain. Now, if density is being considered in the name of increasing the property tax base, there's a few issues to address there as well. Building bigger isn't a panacea for financial troubles, and 20 condo units are not going to provide any appreciable increase in tax revenues. Now, remember, the financial impact statement that you saw this evening, which showed modest returns at best, is a best-case scenario. Nor does that take into account the potential devaluations of properties that surround the development or elsewhere in the community because of increased supply. In terms of tax revenue, a substantial development like this might well be a zero-sum proposition if it negatively impacts surrounding properties. And another consideration, if we're throwing open the gates to dense development in an effort to get property tax revenue, that might be interpreted as the village government somewhat waving the white flag regarding financial management. We've had a lot of other opportunities to strengthen the tax base here. Perhaps we're giving away too much in sales taxes. Perhaps we've let other developments sit dormant. And perhaps we've just refused to pursue other opportunities that could strengthen the tax base, one of which you guys were in support of but were summarily rebuffed. So no one should pretend that a 20-unit condo building is going to be a significant financial engine or that its impact on our community is worth the small incremental tax proceeds. And I'll turn this off. As you can tell, I'm from Buffalo, New York, and that's the Buffalo Bill symbol. So we'll just say, let's go Buffalo and make that go away. Now, along those lines, it isn't the purview of the village to revise or ignore existing ordinances to provide developers with return on investment. If that's the case, then we hope that the village will provide recoupment to those homeowners who have lost value in their homes as well. In conclusion, we've said it once and we'll say it again. The people of Lake Bluff don't oppose development. but it needs to be done in a responsible manner that limits the impact on our community and the families who live here. And the 30-foot, two-story compromise struck that balance, and it reflects a reasonable transition between the CBD and the surrounding homes and families. At bottom, and in conclusion, there's no reason to revisit the bargain that was struck a short time ago. The village should not and cannot go back on its word that there will be no 3-on-3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, John will give you a hand with that.
Turn it back on. I'm gonna try to.
Taking notes.
While we're waiting, just a brief process note. So as Mr. Isham said earlier, this matter, of course, could potentially be back before you in January if the developer, was to submit a formal plan. So the process right now, we're in a preliminary workshop. We're in the second of those. Before anything could be built, you would have a preliminary development plan that would go to the village board to be approved, and then a final development plan. So again, if people aren't familiar with that mechanism, there's a path to go, and there will be more opportunities to see more developed plans and to comment.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Neisted. I live at 131 East North Avenue. I'm going to try to go back and forth between glasses, so since we're limited to 4 minutes or whatever, I'm going to try to make this quick, and I'm going to breeze through some stuff that I had prepared. Thanks, Mark, for your comments, and I think I'm going to bring up mostly just the law. As some of you know, I only practice law in Illinois. I'm an investment advisor. I only practiced for a couple years. But I do know the law. And as Rob Isham said, this board and the other board in town, the village board, which voted unanimously September 12, 2016, to limit the height and density and create a PMD for this property, created a statute, if you will, a law. And by that, I mean, that's pretty much in stone. This board can make recommendations to the village board, but you can't come and say all of a sudden, well, we're going to just change the law. Okay, so no 3-on-3 is what we ran on in 2015 and 16, but it isn't by any means the entire PMD. What I'm going to go through here really quickly, Block 1 has never been fully occupied. It had no single-family homes around it, so we can't compare this to Block 1. I believe Mr. Anderson owns property on Block 2. I think there's a distinct conflict there. He also represents the sellers. Now he's going to represent the condo owners. I think there's no reason to assume that any retail owner in this town is going to come up here and be against this. So I strongly urge you to take any retailer or anyone that has a vested interest in this property and take their opinions with a grain of salt. I'm going to race through this because some of it's already been addressed. What I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to show you a picture of my home. This is 131 East North Avenue. I had a video guy just show to me what a 38 to 40-foot structure behind my home on North Avenue would look like. This is my backyard. This is where the sun hits at 2:30 on a November afternoon, okay? This is my view of the PNC Bank building, which is 20 feet high. Now, this is the view that I would get with your new structure. That's a 38-foot structure across the backyard of my home. That's my new backyard. Okay, here is even a farther one. This is from my balcony. When I bought my home 15 years ago, it cost me $984,000 to build it. It's all brick and stone. The zoning was very, very clear. And then 3 years ago, I had to fight to get the zoning law changed to the point where I was comfortable, and that was the no 3-on-3 project. This is my backyard overlooking the PNC building. This is a 38-foot structure across my backyard. Now, I'm not the only one on this block. There's 3 other homes on this block, but my point is going to be that one of the main PMD partial ordinance issues was lighting, okay? And it's not just daylight, by the way, because in the backyard, that is all dark at night. And guess what 20 condo units would do at nighttime for me? Not a lot. Okay, so here's that overhead view of what this new building would look like in downtown Lake Bluff, Illinois. That's the size and scope of that constant, big, huge block of concrete and brick. That's what it would look like in your backyard if you had my home. Okay, all of these are single-family homes. I'm going to give you a quick statistic, and most of you probably don't know this. There are 40 homeowners within 400 feet of that property. 40, not 4, not 10, not 14, but 40. I got that via FOIA. That's a real simple thing. Drew Irvin was very helpful in getting me the list of the homeowners within 400 feet of that property. So this is what my backyard would look like with a 40-foot structure behind it. And now Brad wants to say that that wouldn't affect my property value at all. Okay, so I put $984,000 into that house. I don't think I would get that. If you want to buy it for $984,000, Brad, I would sell it to you tonight. Contract for deed. This is the overhead image of that, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of what that looked like. Here is the actual PMD that we worked very hard for 18 months to get. This is actually the law in place that you, as a board, have to abide by when you make your recommendations. This is what's in stone in Lake Bluff, Illinois. So for them to come here and say we want to change this zoning, they have to do a lot more than just change the no 3-on-3. They have to get a variance for 40 feet instead of 30 feet. They have to get a variance for 3 stories. But let's go through the standards and codes and the real law, because here's where it really gets to me. Here's the public welfare. The PMD shall be designed, located, and proposed to be operated and maintained so that it will not impair an adequate supply of light and air to the adjacent properties. The impact on other property owners, the PMD shall not be unnecessarily injurious, blah, 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 shall not be inconsistent with the community character of the neighborhood, shall not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or be incompatible with other property in the immediate vicinity. That's 40 homeowners, ladies and gentlemen. That's not just Lee Nystad. The uses permitted on a PMD must be of a type and so located as to exercise no undue detrimental influence upon surrounding properties. Okay. The PMD shall not substantially and adversely affect a known archaeological, historical, or cultural resource. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to race through this because I know I'm taking up a lot of time. Beneficial common open space. Someone said earlier what the impervious surface was. If you took that entire block and you leveled it to ground, you could really only use about 60% of it. They want to use about 80% of it. That's kind of crazy. That's not open space. That has nothing to do with this. It says beneficial common open space. He says, well, we were going to put a space in between the 2 buildings. It's not useful. Well, guess what? It is. It is to me. It is to anyone that wants some light. Okay. To the extent practical, common open space in the PMD shall be integrated into overall design. Now, these are the law, ladies and gentlemen. As Rob Isham said, this is estoppel. This is something you guys have to agree to before. You're going to have to change at least 2 or 3 of these. Now we're going to change another one. Lighting for the PMD shall preserve and enhance the dark at night character. Well, as I said, when I look outside my back door at night, guess what I see? Dark. It's dark in Lake Bluff. Well, what are 20 condos going to do to my backyard or the neighborhood in general? 20 condos at night. I guarantee the lighting will be different. Well, dark at night is a character that we required in the PMD. We didn't go to this, sight unseen. It took 400 families at the last board meeting to get this adjudicated. It took 1,000 petition signatures to get this adjudicated. We spent 18 months getting this PMD done. Surface water drainage, okay? Kevin Considine and I spent a fortune putting our backyards together because this property leaks into our backyards. That's not an easy solution. Compliance with
One more minute, Mr. Nysted.
Okay.
Thank you.
One more thing. Maximum PMD height, here it is, 30 feet and 2 stories. And then finally, violation of any such condition or limitation would be a violation of this chapter and shall constitute grounds for the revocation of the entire PMD. So I guarantee you what they're going to have to do is come to you and say, we want to wipe out the PMD because this won't work. We're going to have to set up a new structure in order to build this building, because guess what? It can't exist under the current law. Thank you.
Yeah, and as you know, your previous comments are all reflected in the record, so it's all
Thank you.
memorialized.
Appreciate it, Gary.
Certainly.
Good evening, I'm Jean Nemi. I'm at 580 Evanston Avenue. I am the property directly behind the furthest east spot of Block 3, where the green space is. So as not to repeat myself, since I've just been assured that everything has been captured that we said last time, I guess my biggest question is, I think what everyone is saying is, what has changed since the first time we went through this? There were a number of us, hundreds of us, that came to these meetings, that signed petitions, that said we didn't agree with 3 stories on Block 3, no 3 on 3. The one thing I do want to reiterate that I wanted to start with is nearly all of us that came together for no 3 on 3 are not opposed to development on this lot. We all love Lake Bluff. We all have passion for living here. We all chose to live here for a reason. We're not opposed to development. What we're opposed to is what has been proposed in the past with 3 stories, the density of the projects. And we spent, as Lee just said, and others have said, 18 months, and the board agreed that 3 stories was not appropriate for this spot or for Lake Bluff. So at the very basic, what we asked in November, and now here we are again a month later, is what has changed? And what the developer and Brad have come back with, I don't see what has changed, what the difference is, how they've answered our concerns. Just quickly to tick through a couple of things after listening to the proposals tonight. I just want to make mention that it gives me pause that the only survey that's been presented last time and tonight is from 1994 and 1997 about the need for senior housing. I just feel like you probably could do better than that in terms of assuring us that you're going to be able to sell 20 units for senior housing. You talked about not downsizing and right-sizing. It's not just about one level. I mean, these aren't going to be one level, so if that's even a consideration, it sounds to me like many of these are more than one level. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Again, we've talked about the cost, $700,000 to $1 million. If you're downsizing, right-sizing, I mean, at 65, I hope not to be spending $1 million, but I don't know, maybe people are more successful than I am and can do that. The biggest thing that I took away from tonight that made me nervous is that Brad, as a realtor, said he gave us a staging of 2021, 22, 23, and that this won't be done until 2023 because he said, quote, the market's just not that strong. So right now, one of the points he made tonight was that the property is sitting empty and that it's not being maintained. So now we're going to build. It's going to take us 3 years to build and to fill. The owners tonight aren't keeping it up, and they've bought the property thinking they were going to have other things that they put in the space. It hasn't worked. They're not maintaining it. Now we're going to build. Now we're going to have a big honking building hanging over us that isn't going to sell possibly and won't be maintained. That doesn't give me a lot of confidence. So again, I'd like to end where I started is what has changed from the first time around when we spent 18 months of our time and hours being here and with the board's time and coming to a resolution that no 3 on 3. What has changed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Rick Lesser. I live at 327 West Hawthorne Court. I am not a neighbor of this project. I wanted to make a couple of points, too. Number one, I am disappointed to see, so recently, after the village went through the disagreements and disputes over this very similar proposal 3 years ago, and the village resolved that, no, we would not have a three-story building on this site, and yet here we are back again. That was my one. My number two, projections about real estate tax revenue. Stonebridge, similarly, 13 years ago, made many promises and projections of great real estate tax revenues that would flow to the schools with no new kids, that would flow to the village, would flow to the local governments. That has never materialized. In fact, the assessor recently reassessed Stonebridge to make to assess its land at the same value as the neighbors, including myself. The Stonebridge appealed that, and it was reduced because it's still considered just to be in development. No development has occurred since 2008. It's been 13 years now, and the projections have never materialized. Similarly, I hope that the board will bear in mind that projections are just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lesser. Any other public comment?
Good evening. My name is Tom McAfee. I'm at 100 East North Avenue. My wife spoke briefly earlier. Just a couple of additional comments. Having gone through this experience before, it's disappointing to be back and having virtually the same conversation, but I just wanted to make sure that I touched on a few points that were referenced earlier. One was relative to the demographics that are going to be occurring in the county, and I know them well. And I think you also have to recognize what happens after, the shift in the boomers, which I'm one. There'll be a rapid decline, and then we'll have an asset that, certainly will have a life beyond 20 years or 30 years. I think we have to really be thoughtful about changing the character just because of a demographic shift. This community's been here for quite some time, and I think that the character that's built is what drew us here. We've been residents for 15 years. We've enjoyed the community. But I think it's so important to really appreciate the scale of this structure. It is substantial, and at 3 stories with the setback from the street, when we look at the other images that were thrown up from Lake Forest, there's a material difference in the application. So, and of course, whatever you put in Block 3 will be in Block 2 eventually. In fact, there was a developer that advanced just that earlier. So we're not just talking about Block 3. And it's just really allowing CREEP to move significantly deeper into the community. I think the additional few residents, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the units that sold would only have part-time presence, much like some of those in Lake Bluff, where people have a place here, they'll have a place in Florida and somewhere else. So again, I just really do believe the basic elements here, it's a real estate play. Interest rates are where they are today. It's predictable. This will go up. You're seeing them occur in multiple areas. And then there'll be a bust, soon enough, and, we'll be left holding the bag in that regard. So I think that before we just go ahead and approve something 3 stories, my wife referenced it, our house is probably worth 25, 30% less than what we bought it 15 years ago. That's after putting in quite a bit of money. That's on us. That's the risk that we're willing to take. But I think that for us to have to absorb the economic reality of what that property sold for and the ROI that's necessary, requiring a 3-story element, I think shouldn't be the burden of our community in changing the basic character of it. So thank you for hearing me out, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Dave Mark. I live at 117 East North Avenue. As a homeowner living directly adjacent to Block 3, I've closely followed the debates over the last 4 years regarding the potential development of this property. And although I've consistently expressed my support for the concept of development in line with the CBD planning principles. I've never felt that the potential benefits of the specific proposals brought before this board have, on balance, outweighed the possible adverse impacts or risks associated with those proposals. I continued to hold that opinion even last month when I sent Drew a note indicating that I could not support the current proposal as shown in November. But subsequent to that meeting, I reflected a bit on the current state of Block 3. Unfortunately, in the 4 years since these debates first began, little has changed. We're hearing that tonight. But what does that mean for me? It means each morning when I look out my bedroom window, I see a vacant, deteriorating commercial building and parking lot. It was never a pleasant view, and it certainly hasn't improved with age. But I also see a missed opportunity for Lake Bluff. So as I reevaluate the current proposal, I am rethinking my criteria to reflect my strong dissatisfaction with the status quo. While it is possible that changes could make things even worse for me, for example, a restaurant that was proposed to go in there a few years ago, I am now more willing to compromise if we can take a positive step forward for the village and perhaps more importantly, eliminate the uncertainty that is likely depressing our current home values. Since the last meeting, my wife and I also had an opportunity to meet with Peter and Brad to discuss our specific concerns and hear firsthand how they saw this property fitting into our community. I was appreciative of them taking the time to share their perspectives, their willingness to consider modifications to their plans to accommodate our concerns, such as the setbacks on the penthouse level that Peter showed earlier. I believe Peter, Brad, and the property's current owners, as local residents, have a stake in doing what's best for Lake Bluff and not just in optimizing their economic interest. The current proposal has many benefits. It would provide a type of housing that is currently absent in our community and for which there's demand. We can debate how much demand, but there is demand. It would put 20 new households within a short walk of downtown, bringing greater vibrancy to our local businesses. It should provide a net fiscal benefit to the village, as incremental tax revenues should exceed demands on our infrastructure given the anticipated demographics of these new households. And based on the renderings provided, as well as the developer's recent work in Lake Forest, I'm confident that the building itself would be significantly more attractive than the current building that's on the property. And thoughtful landscaping, as well as other features such as burying the existing power lines, would only enhance the aesthetics. This proposal also addressed some of the concerns with previous proposals. The extensive underground parking should minimize the impact of street parking, and the north side of the property, which had been an alley and a garage entrance in early proposals, would now be a landscape pedestrian walkway, which as a neighbor who would be bordering on that is much better than what the alternatives had. But certainly some other concerns remain. The excavation required for the underground parking has the potential to alter drainage for surrounding properties, so this needs to be addressed early on. Traffic flow will also have to be evaluated, particularly regarding the garage entrance on Oak Avenue. And while this type of housing is needed in Lake Bluff, these are a lot of units for the market to absorb. I agree. And finally, until the building is completed, it will be hard to fully understand the impact on the look and feel of our downtown. This proposed development probably wouldn't be my first choice for Block 3, but I'm willing to compromise and see this option as quite preferable to the status quo. The fact that the owners and developers are our neighbors gives me reason to believe that this proposal has sincerely taken into account the needs of the community and would be executed with a similar degree of consideration. Therefore, on balance, I'm inclined to support the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Folkert. I reside at 108 East North Avenue. Just an observation based on what I saw last month and again this evening and the significance of this project, that it seems it would be prudent upon the village to build an actual physical model outlining the village and then this development to give everyone a scale of what the size of the facility would look like in reference to the rest of the community. I think it's, we're debating, we have pro-development, which I think would help the neighborhood. I think we have concerns over size, and to have a physical model to look at and view maybe in the center here next month would be very worthwhile, and I would think everyone at the village should consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kevin Considine. I live at 125 East North Avenue. Also, like several of the other speakers, over the back fence from the site that we're discussing tonight. As others have said, I too have grown concerned about the deteriorating condition of the current bank building. Not only is it an eyesore in a really key location in the village, but also the uncertainty that surrounds it isn't doing any good for anybody. Moreover, the commercial ideas that have been floated for the site, I believe would be a major step backwards. I have nothing against pizza places. In fact, I frequent them, but I don't want to live behind one. And that was floated a couple years ago and apparently is again floating out there again as well. A few weeks ago, I stood up and said that, I'm not as concerned about density as others have said. I actually think bringing those additional folks to the village would be good for the village for a number of reasons. I think the variety of housing stock would also be a benefit for the town. And many have said that here there have been varying sides of that discussion here tonight. I saw a study from the Brookings Institute this week that would back up that position. I shared my concerns about this specific project at the last meeting, ultimately, I think, lacking words and just saying it just feels too big. But as Mr. Mark said, the developer and the owner listened. They heard our concerns, and I believe have made some thoughtful adjustments to the plan to address some of those. Among those, recessing the top floor in order to reduce the perception of the size. As has been mentioned, the underground parking, I think, is really key to this plan, not only to reduce an existing parking challenge in the village, but also that means that there aren't driveways and garage doors on the backside. For those of us that live on the backside, that's pretty significant. Also with this plan, I think the fact that we have local owner and local developer who have, and in the case of the developer, who have a track record of doing high quality work right next door, I think that really counts for a lot. And there are no guarantees that in future scenarios that would be the case. I appreciate the compromises and frankly am prepared to support this compromise. I believe it'll benefit the town and help move the CBD forward. Many folks have shared concerns about what it means for Block 2. Those concerns, I believe, are legitimate and valid and really should get strong consideration by this body. I think a plan guiding especially the north side of Block 2, and I suppose for that matter Block 1, that a plan guiding that block to a goal that would not allow this type of scale. I think an innovative planning solution that are attractive, appropriate, and acceptable are absolutely possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Deb Fisher. I live at 215 East Prospect in Lake Bluff, and I am also a realtor in town. I have no ties to this project. I don't even work for the same firm that Brad works for, but I just want to identify that. That said, I have come in support of the project this evening for a variety of reasons. And I think to the question, what has changed? Nothing has changed, in a sense. As many have identified, the property with those kind of requirements that were put on it in, I guess, 2016, have not captured the ability to move forward. So we've been still there with the PNC Bank, and I don't think that any developer is going to come along and be able to do a two-story project there. When we talk about all of the projects that have been successful around, they're 3 stories. And simply that's economy of scale. We live in an area with expensive land, construction costs are high, And even for the future, spreading HOA fees over 3-story units makes more sense. So I guess that's part of why I'm saying I think it is time to reassess what was decided then, because I think the lack of moving forward is an issue. I do think that this project will be a great bookend for the business district as it then begins the start of single family. I also like that as a bookend, it pays homage to Block 1, which is already considered a classic part of downtown. And remember, Block 1 had caused consternation when it was going through the approval process. Now it's a cherished part of town. I'm fine with the height, the 3-story height. I like how the developer has adjusted to people's requests. I do think that the ruling on the books that forced the 2-story maximum was, in my opinion, arbitrary and somewhat unrealistic, obviously. So the rules were changed at that time. I think the rules can be changed again. If residents are concerned about the quality, that the quality of the building will somehow impact the value, I don't see that happening anywhere. I don't see it in Lake Forest. I don't see it in our neighbors, Libertyville. Obviously, I can't control the fact that, yes, unfortunately, our market suffered between, if you bought in 2006 and 7, we are down, as somebody said, about 30%. That's a given. But being near this kind of unit is not, near this kind of project is not going to diminish your home's value. What likely has contributed to the slow sales around the 120 Scranton property, in my opinion, in the last few years, is simply the unknown. Buyers hate uncertainty, and we can point to other instances where lack of a development plan has caused buyers to avoid buying someplace. But once the project is approved and moving forward, the uncertainty goes away and people can move forward. The architect and developer have excellent reputations creating projects in Lake Forest similar to this with great success. Peter Whitmer's got a proven model of understanding buyer needs and producing a quality product that Lake Bluff can be proud of. The one that they did is very similar. They took down a low-rise building in Lake Forest. I don't think anybody even remembers it now, and it's only been a couple of years that that low-rise office building went away. I do think, to your point that you mentioned at the last meeting, I do think that it could attract millennials. I don't think it's only going to be an empty nester project. I think that we've got a lot of millennials on the pharmaceutical corridor that may well not want to take that train back downtown in the evening and come up in the morning. So I don't think it'll be the major market probably, but I do think it can happen certainly. So 2 points. I think that retailers are also important in their opinions. I do think they do keep a town vibrant. They need this kind of activity. And last, importantly, last point, when I moved here, there was a big block building in the middle of downtown Lake Bluff. It was on east of block, I guess it was block 4.5 or something, but it was the children's home. And it was there forever, and we all had houses around it and everything, and that was there for a long time, and it was probably it certainly seemed a lot taller to me as a child, but it was a vibrant part of our town, so I don't think that it can't happen that way. So anyway, I hope that you will be in support of the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Kate Briand. I live at 610 Lincoln Avenue. And like Mr. Lesser, I am not a neighbor of this property, but I am a resident, longtime resident of Lake Bluff, who, by the way, has benefited mightily from real estate. I'm a third-generation beneficiary of that. My grandfather developed houses here in Lake Bluff in the 30s and 40s, and my dad was in the real estate business for 50 years, so I can't say I'm against development because it put me through college. But I know this about developers. They're always going to give you the spin, the positive spin. So, for example, what if all 20 units are bought by people with kids and we need to add them to the schools? We have to consider that because this is all speculative. Nobody knows what's going to happen. They could all sit empty. They could be sold to people who are there a few months of the year and then go to Florida or Aspen or wherever. So we don't know. But what I do know is this. Mr. Anderson and the architect and the owners would like you to think that this is just a workshop about a proposed condo development. But after the last meeting, I thought a lot about it, and I see things differently. I think this is about something much more fundamental. Mr. Anderson and someone else just said that the board's decision 3 years ago to limit the height of the buildings on Block 3 to 30 feet was arbitrary. That word is used intentionally, and it is inaccurate. As you have heard, that decision was the result of 18 months of meetings and a petition with 1,000 signatures. Just to put that number into context for you, around that same time, our current village president, was elected with just over 1,000 votes, about 1,200 to be exact. And I remember that because I ran in that election. So if we're going to give weight to that, then I think we better give weight to those 1,000 voices, who, as Member Danley pointed out at the last meeting, are our neighbors and their friends and your constituents. And, not to put too fine a point on it, but that petition is also an expression of Lake Bluff residents' First Amendment rights and their right to free expression. And I don't hold anything more dear than that. Anytime any government body seeks to override the voice of the people, it can only do so with a compelling reason, and I have yet to hear one. And the vacant nature of this property isn't compelling enough to override the voices of 1,000 residents of Lake Bluff. It's incumbent upon the owner to keep up the property, not us to rescue him from a bad real estate investment. Because as someone just said, then I'd like to get back my 10% that I've lost in the value of my home. Anybody who reads the Lake Forester saw that a very well-known person just took a massive hit on a home that he sold here in Lake Bluff. That's real estate. I know it very well. I lived through 1980, 81, and 82, and it was horrible. Real estate's risky, but that doesn't mean that we have to change things here, which is what you're being asked to do, and what the village board is being asked to do. So, as Mr. Burns pointed out at the last meeting, it's vacant. And the neighbors don't like it, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't either. But it is not accurate to say that there was never a proposal for 2 stories. There was, and those of us who were involved in the last go-around remember it. Someone stood at this very podium and said that they would be willing to build a 2-story building on that piece of property, and for various reasons, that was rejected. So what I'm asking you to think about is whether we want a government that is going to be for and by the people, or whether we want a developer to make our choices for us. The developer said at the last meeting, they won't build 2 stories even if the property were free. Is that a compelling enough reason? No, that's about ROI. That's not a compelling enough reason to override 1,000 voices. And then we just heard from our village president that government doesn't stand still. Well, you know what else it shouldn't be? A game of whack-a-mole, where we don't know what the government is going to do next. This has been litigated. We've already heard the voices of all of these people. Why are we here? The only material change is who's asking. That's it, nothing else. So the question that you have to really ask yourselves is, in addition to everything else you've heard, are you really seriously ready to tell all those people that their voices don't matter? I'm not. I don't want to live in a place like that. I think it's incumbent upon the owners of this property to find someone who will develop in accordance with the existing ordinance, not the other way around. Because if we go down that path, we are never going to be able to recover from that.
Thank you. Any other public comments, so to speak?
Jason Trombley. I live at 206 East Scranton. I'm also the landowner of the lots 4 and 5 that are on the northwest corner of Evanston, Scranton, part of this project. First off, very excited to be living in Lake Bluff. My wife's dream. My wife grew up in Tingley Oaks, and it was her dream to live in East Lake Bluff, which was the reason we purchased the land to build a single-family home. 4 kids later, that became a little more difficult when the chaos. And we adjusted and moved nearby, 2 houses away at 206. I will say I love I've come to love Lake Bluff, and I've come to love all of you guys, even Lee. I'm looking forward to having a beer with you when this is all said and done eventually. I will say one factual thing is I could, as of right today, build a house that's 36 feet tall. That's 6 feet above the 30-foot mark that people seem to be focused on. So as of right today, I could build up to 36 feet, and the setbacks would be much closer to the alley than what Mr. Whitmer has proposed in the current plan. So just wanted that fact to be set out there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Hearing none, we'll shift into the commissioners' discussion now. Who'd like to get started?
Can you read Member Russell's letter first?
I was just going to propose the very same thing.
Oh, yeah, read it into the record?
Certainly. So, again, Member Russell was hoping to join us telephonically today, a qualifying reason to do so, but had some unfortunate personal issues that have kept him from doing so. His statement, very short. Let it be known, I strongly oppose a 3-story project. It is very unfair to the immediate neighbors. Zoning regulations and past planning exists for a purpose. Major guidelines are being ignored. George Russell. Very brief.
Thank you. Well, we've covered certainly a considerable amount of ground so far in this session and in the session that we conducted in November of 2019. I think it's a positive that there's been excellent community involvement. It's a positive that Mr. Whitmer and Mr. Anderson have reached out to the neighbors, have had a dialogue at least with some of the neighbors. One of the critical issues, I think, and I might be wrong, is the height issue. And I thought maybe from Mr. Anderson's perspective or Mr. Whitmer's perspective, maybe you could give us a little more insight as to where we stand now on the height. I know that the setback from the north side of the building certainly is a positive from the neighbor's perspective, and I think that's a critical point, obviously.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and it's been stated, I think you're right in terms of, the overall project, us doing a 2-story building or a 3-story, or what I call a 2-story with a penthouse. It, unfortunately, it really, and that's kind of what we're working towards. We're trying to minimize the impact of the 3rd story and doing whatever we can do to get that achieved. With the underground parking and all the amenities, as I said in the last meeting, it really makes the project infeasible. And I think, you've seen that through no one's, at least we're not willing to go forward with the project if we're limited to 2 stories in height. The economic outcome of it just does not work. So I think, a few feet, whether it's 38 feet or 40 feet, I think that's something we absolutely could look at and think about. But I think if you said, if the direction was 2 stories, we would respectfully move from this because we just would not, it's just not feasible. I think one of the things you have to look at is the perspective of you don't look at things straight on an elevation, and that you see things as it steps back. Obviously, things go down in perspective. So that's what one of the things that we look at 3-dimensional. I think, the idea of models is a good one. I would say I think it's really a positive idea to look at this in model form, and that's typically what we do, not to look at in flat elevations.
No, I was real impressed by that particular comment. That, from my perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Just gives you that visual perspective. I guess providing it's not too cost intrusive from your perspective.
Yeah, I think if we were moving forward, we would absolutely, if we felt there was a positive, we felt like we could, I feel like we can work with the neighbors and continually improve it, and that we would, if we were to move forward, absolutely provide a model, a massing model for that. We've done that with the other projects and used that. it will show the actual size of what it is. The only thing I would ask is that people actually get down to the level of the street and not look at it like you were in a helicopter, because I think it's not the way you perceive the space.
And then as far as foliage in the back, meaning on the north side of the property line, Mr. Whitmer, what were you contemplating? What species and how dense and things like that?
You know, we've had a fair amount of experience with this, and we would engage landscape architects and most likely use Mariani landscape architects. That's who we've used in the past and have very good results in that. And I think there'd be a variety of things. The other thing that we've done in the past, which has worked really well, is to work with the neighbors and if there's things that need to be planted or changed on their property, and to minimize the impact, or how we do it on ours, whether it be evergreen, deciduous, how long does the species, how quickly does that species grow, how tall does that species grow, what is the characteristics of all that. So I think, we would look at it and think about all those things, but I don't think there'd be one species, or be a multiple of different things in different layers of that. And we'd like to think about it in the long term, not just as it's planted, but what happens 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 years from now. Is that the right tree to put in there?
And then with respect to the existing power lines, as a matter of right, I guess with permission from ComEd and whoever else has the easement, you would be able to bury them at your own expense, or you're quite confident that you would?
We have had some experience with that, and we feel pretty confident that it's pretty mandatory that we do that. I don't think that's really an option for us. Not only just because I think it's so impactful in terms of what we can grow there and the visuals. I think, you saw some pictures of the backyards. I think the pictures that Lee showed, one of the most prominent things is the pole and the transformers in the backyard. So I think not only getting rid of those, but then the ability to grow trees there too. But I think we have to do that. I mean, it's just part of the project, overall costs. I think the quality of development that we have would require to have down. And that's one of the things about this, is that we spend a fair amount of money on landscape and hardscape and all that, because it's the quality of the development. It's the quality of the finished product that if we don't spend it, we won't attract the right kind of buyers that we are looking for, the kind of people that we're looking to do that, expect that kind of quality.
And then I guess I could ask this of Mr. Cole or other members of the village, but as a matter of right now, under the current zoning, you or somebody else could erect a facade that's 30 feet high on that north boundary, all the way across.
Correct. That on the northern parcels, on the western parcels. On the eastern parcel, that would be 35 feet, and it would be somewhat limited in terms of the size due to the residential characteristics of that. But I think you're right, is if we could show that where we have 35 feet, right? I think there is a setback of, what's the setback? I think it's 7 feet for that side, for that yard.
Yeah, just a moment.
What would it be?
And we don't have to get into the
No, I know,
specifics, but just general dialogue.
Exactly. What is there currently? The building there currently is well under the zoning that would be allowed by the current zoning, correct?
You're referring to,
Oh, go ahead.
So which setback we're referring to? The easternmost setback?
I was talking about the north in the backyard.
North side? Yeah, that would be 20 feet.
20 feet?
18 or 20.
20-foot setback, but you could put up a 30-foot wall.
36 feet tall, yeah.
36 feet?
36.
Oh, well, on the eastern two-fifths, the single-family residence could be 36 feet tall.
Right.
To be clear, it's not a wall.
No.
It's the apex of the roof of a single-family residence, right?
For the single family.
You could build a box if you wanted to. I don't think anyone would, but you could.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, it
Somewhat
doesn't
theoretical
distinguish
construct.
it doesn't distinguish between roof pitch and roof slope and things like that, it could be relatively tall.
Understood.
Other commissioners, feel free to jump in. A lot of issues.
You know, at this point, given that it's a workshop and we don't have a lot of details, and considering the fact that we currently have a restriction on 30 feet, if this was to happen, it would be along with a change in the current ordinance, I would assume. I don't know. At least at this point, I don't understand the pathway via variance, so I would think it would have to be a change to the current ordinance. So if there's really no sense in giving feedback according to the current, because it's 3 stories versus 2. The applicant doesn't want to do 2, so the comments that I would make are only of the scenario that these other pathways happen, that the board would then decide to choose to change the 30-foot guidance. And the comments that I would give are similar to what I did a couple of years ago when this came up, in that, you know, most of these things are compromised. You can't have everything. So I think I would like to prioritize the transition between the building and the development and the adjacent residential districts. And so I was happy to see the changes, which I had not given any guidance to, but the applicant or the developer, they haven't applied yet, has already considered that to set back. And I think that was, to me, probably the most important part of you giving up a little bit of density, or I'm sorry, creating a little bit more density by pushing the building together, and giving more setback on the eastern side, and also on the northern side, pulling that away a little bit too. And same thing on the 3rd floor, pushing that back. So to me, that's the most important element, is creating that transition. You know, with that, there's several details, you know, lots of details that we'd have to see with an actual application, but to me, that's the most important, is just creating that setback and pushback, which I was happy to see in their second option.
Thank you, David.
Would it be too cumbersome for me to get a little bit more information about just how this goes through, if at all? Because, you know, to Dave's point, and we talked about this last time, like, what stars would have to align if we said, great, this looks great? Can somebody take me through what happens next if we love it?
So I think the next stage is it's up to the developer and the property owners and to figure out what avenue they would like to proceed down. So they would go and take any feedback that is provided, and they have the right, if they desire, to submit an application. They can apply for various different types of relief. So if their building they submit an application for a building that is more than 30 feet, it depends if they're going to apply as part of a planned development. They could choose that route, or they could try to apply as of right under the current regulations.
Okay.
So if they apply for a planned development and with the height, I would assume they would also be applying for a text amendment to the code, or they could apply for a variation as part of that application.
So say they do all that, and we listen and consider, then we vote it in favor of it, and it goes to the board, and nothing happens with respect to it unless and until they decide to do, A, approve the application, and B, the text amendment to the, and not necessarily in that order. Both of those things would have to happen before anything
Right, so any planned development application would need to comply with the code. So whether it's also joined by an application for a variation or a text amendment, something would need to happen if it, what they're proposing does not satisfy the requirements of the code.
And so is it typical, I mean, this feels backwards to me, but maybe, I'm the new guy, so maybe it's not backwards, it just sort of feels backwards to me.
It is not uncommon for an applicant to submit many, multiple applications in terms of different types of relief. And it happens, and our code doesn't prohibit it. They can choose to apply for a text amendment first, and then if that's successful, then apply for the plan development approval. They could choose to apply concurrently. It is up to the applicant to decide what type of relief they want to apply for, what process. Any applicant has the right to apply. Now, and then it's up to this body and up to the village board to decide kind of how you take it and proceed through the process.
And I take it that they wouldn't do the text amendment first without having the plans accompanied them, because obviously the board's willingness to consider changing that text might be dependent on what plan was being proposed. So you would expect them to do it at the same time?
It's up to the applicant. I mean,
I see.
They have the right to apply, and then it's up to eventually the village board to decide whether or not they would grant the applications.
I thought we'd been talking about PMD the whole time. Is there really an as-of-right avenue here? Because there is. So this building, but just with different variances? Same kind of thing? Okay.
Different road.
Different road, but
Different
still
road,
backwards.
In the CBD, there are numerous requirements that any person applying for a building permit would have to meet. If an applicant came forward and met every single one of the requirements, they would not need any variations.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't necessarily need to go through the plan development process. There are benefits to the plan development process. It's, and it goes beyond just getting exceptions to the code. But somebody could submit a building permit application, and so long as they meet all the requirements, it would not come before this body.
Okay, thank you. I'll try not to ask again.
It's okay if you do.
I had just a few thoughts that I jotted down over the last week as we've prepared for this, because we've heard a few new things tonight, but in reality, this is a bit of a rehash of last month's meeting. So if you'll excuse a little bit the progression of the thoughts, I think the petitioner is citing an unmet need for diverse housing, multi-dwelling units, empty nest residences. This is absolutely the case in the community. This is something we need. It's been identified by the village. This is a priority. The one point I'd make to the petitioner is I personally wouldn't put up a 1994 survey ever. It's 25 years old. I don't think it's germane. I think, in fact, it's so old it weakens your case. But I think the underlying truth is probably still the case. I just wouldn't really bank on it. You talk about cleaning up an eyesore, which is, again, something I think we all agree on. I don't think anybody likes the condition of that property, and I'll come back to that at the end. I also don't dispute the need for first-level entry properties. My parents are in their mid-70s, just moved here, bought a small ranch house on the north side of town. It's an important criteria for residents of the village, and we certainly want to provide that if the market will bear it. You mentioned that more residents would encourage our local businesses in the CBD. We all have friends who have businesses in the village, and I think that would be great if we could really engineer that. I don't dispute the need for more tax revenue. I take issue with the methodology that you're using for the projection. I think it's very speculative, but it certainly would create more tax revenue than the present, and I don't think we have to try to quantify it to know that that would be a positive. I really like the development. I think with the focus on landscaping would all look lovely. Great that you're burying the power lines, which are a pet peeve of mine around the village as a whole. I think they're an eyesore. I am a bit concerned that you haven't provided more green space in the central area between the two buildings. I think you could easily do that, possibly lose a little bit of developed space, but it would increase permeable surface and also just create, I think, a bit more consistent feel with the village, which is kind of a tree-lined place along the way. But I think that that's something that would be addition to normal petition process. A couple of concerns, though. I do think that these units would sell like hotcakes. But I haven't heard anything in your presentation tonight that addressed a question that I raised last month, which is, what's going to be the impact of putting 20 more units on the market in terms of housing prices for comparable homes?
Impact of 20 existing homes on the market.
20 new units that you'd be building and putting on the market. What would be the impact on houses of comparable value in the village? So if you quote in your proposal $700,000 to $950,000 roughly price range, there's about 24 homes in that price range on the market.
Of all housing types, you're right.
Of all housing
Right.
types. And I get the like-for-like point, but at some point, there's bleed over. And I'm at least personally of the view that we have a major demographic shift that's going to take place in this village, and it's going to depress property generally, and this development can make that worse. I don't think it can make it better, but I'd love to hear at some point, and we don't have to address this tonight because I think that this is a bit of an angel's dancing on the head of a pinpoint, but it would be interesting to understand your views about how exactly you think that that's going to play out, because I think that motivates concern for a lot of folks in the village. What I really haven't heard, though, through all this, because these are all great reasons, is why this has to be a 3-story development. As far as I can tell, that's driven entirely by financial factors. Significant fixed costs like elevators, underground parking, underlying property costs. You want to spread them over as many units as possible, and I get that. That's just economics. But I don't think it's this body's job to allow a variation to develop your economics. To make matters worse, you're specifically asking us to recommend that the village basically adopt a variation or a text amendment and overturn a very recent addition to the village code. And that's legislation that resulted from a groundswell of opposition to a similar development. And the text couldn't be more explicit. This is out of bounds. But I went back, and Glenn always provides a helpful summary of how we have to make decisions up here. And there are 4 standards that we have to look at when we recommend a variation. And the 3 that are most relevant here, this is all under 10.2.4, we could conclude that there's a unique physical condition about your property which requires us to give you relief. I don't see any, aside from the price that was paid for it that drives underlying economics. 2, we have to conclude that this is not merely a special privilege, but I think that's exactly what you're asking for, is a special privilege. And number 4, we're obligated to protect public health and safety. And again, the village specifically enshrined in 10.2.4a that there's no impairment on an adequate supply of light and air to adjacent properties. Now, you could build single-family residents, but the reality is that the bulk of those is not going to compare at all to what we're talking about here. So you're asking to create exactly such an impairment. But all of that doesn't really stand in any kind of standing if the village hadn't specifically said you can't have a 3rd floor. So I'd love to see a 2-story plan that addresses these things. I don't think you can't address all these objectives except your financial ones without a 3rd story. It would give us the MDUs we need. It would be a great facility for empty nesters. It would give a boost to local businesses. It would give us more tax revenue. You wouldn't make as much money as you would otherwise, but that's really not our issue. And to your point on backwardsness, I'd say this is a political issue. It's not a technical issue. So if the village board wants this to go ahead, then we can remove the recently adopted legislation and just reverse that. But that's their decision. It's not ours. But a final note, and this is something that I just have to say, we've heard a lot about the deteriorating condition of this property. I think the village administrator should look into whether the landowners are living up to their obligations to maintain the property in good order. An eyesore is not an excuse for a variation. And I think it erodes the credibility of the owners if they're actually coming before us and citing popular dissatisfaction with an eyesore as a rationale for a relief to build this facility. So I think that this starts or finishes where we started last month, which is if the village board wants to have a 3-story development, they should repeal the legislation that they adopted, and then you could proceed with this under a PMD, and they wouldn't need this variation.
Is there a mechanism for us to approach the village board on changing the PMD without going to the plan commission first? I think there's a requirement to go to the plan commission before the village board regardless, isn't there?
So under the code, for a text amendment to the code, which is what would be changing the PMD regulations, is an application would come in, It comes to this body for recommendation, and then it goes to the village board for their decision.
So you're saying we would still come here first
And we would hold.
for a text amendment, and then we would go to the village board to have them approve it, but then we would still come back here to
Then if
do
you,
the submittal for the plan.
and then if there's an then if you wanted to submit an application for a PMD, you could. As I said earlier, it's up to an applicant to decide, what order. If they want to submit something concurrently and go through the process with both the PMD and a text amendment at the same time, or separate, it's, our code allows people to submit amendments, applications for amendments and applications for PMDs. So it's really in the hands of the applicant to decide what path they would want to move down.
Just removal of the two-story limit, or the 30-foot limit, does not give anyone as of right, the right to build this or anything else, right? It's still got to meet all the other criteria that we've set forth, right? So had that not been there, which is, I understand it, when it went to the village board in 16, a recommendation wasn't there, and then it was voted in, the village board voted in the two-story limitation. So had that limitation not been there, we would still have all this discretion we're talking about, right? I mean, is that, we'd still be able to say, don't really like the, full front, the frontage coming straight up to the street, we could still do all of the things that we're endeavoring to get here. That's what seems straightforward to me, that route, but I understand that maybe the village board, without something concrete in front of them that they can trust, because it's people, from the community may not be willing to do it separately. I don't know.
I guess that's what we're working on, isn't it? I mean, we're all working on this compromise. I mean, even this session, instead of 3 stories, we're talking about 2 stories with a setback. We talked about bringing in the building so we can have more landscape is important for everybody. And we talk about a voice. Well, everyone said there was a voice of the people, but we saw tonight that several voices have changed just from listening and being open to an opportunity. So I value that, we say, well, it's been said, it's been done, but if we're not open to compromise or understanding how each time you're trying to work with the community, and I feel that I see a change from last month, and I think we can all do better in trying to compromise. We're all trying to do that. I think there's something to be said about that. It puts us in a difficult situation when we sure would like to change the course of having the village go first, but obviously I sit next to a lawyer who's telling us that can't be possible.
But is that really what you're saying? And the village could just change the rule, yes?
Well,
They don't need us to do anything.
They could adopt
Well,
the statute,
they
the ordinance that we
won't.
proposed.
They won't. That's not a question of what they can do.
To my knowledge, every amendment to the text of the zoning ordinance since it was recodified has first been heard before this.
But is that in law? Is that a legal requirement?
I will pull up the code section.
While Ben pulls that up.
We're an advisory board. They can do whatever they want, right? And they're the legislature.
There may be a process behind it, though. Even a technical process, there may be a process written into the code for whatever reason. You're right.
So under our code, while you're recommending body, there's a public hearing that is held here prior to the village board decision. And so, and for everybody who's not as familiar with our code, I am reading from section 10-2-9, titled Amendments. And subsection D sets out the procedure. The first step in the process is the applicant submits the application, then there's a notice of a public hearing that is provided, and then it comes to this body. and following the conclusion of the public hearing before this body, the PCZBA shall make its recommendation to the Board of Trustees on the proposed amendment. Then it goes to the Board of Trustees for their final determination.
What if there's no applicant? I mean, is it ever possible for the board to be their own applicant? I mean, they see something in the code and they say, well, this just doesn't seem right for whatever reason. I'm not speaking of this, but just something in general. I'm thinking procedurally. Do they just wait for someone to apply, or can they proactively make adjustments?
The village can be an applicant.
Okay, but it would still cycle through with them being the applicant.
Right, so the village, and the village all the time makes applications to change things in its code based on, whether, it's a recommendation from staff or it's an otherwise village-directed or application. But even when that happens under our code, it comes to this body, it's for the public hearing, and then for your recommendation.
Uses in the L1 district, solar panels, swimming pools, sign regulations, happens all the time.
I think the net result is really the same. The village board, as I've been told from the board and from staff, wants the input of the PCZBA. And that's why we're here. We've already tried to work with the neighbors, and we've seen a change in a couple of the neighbors since we were last here. We tried to address as many of those concerns as we could since the last meeting, and that's why we're back looking for direction from this body as to how we should move forward. Because once we go beyond this charrette to a formal application, it gets very expensive. And if this body is already decided it doesn't want to endorse a plan that has 3 stories, even if compromises have been made with the neighbors, then that's a gamble that I don't know developers willing to take. So I think it's really, we're trying to minimize the risk and maximize the reward for the neighbors. I've lived here my whole life. I wouldn't be involved in a project that I honestly didn't believe was a good thing for the village of Lake Bluff. And, while I'm on that topic, you guys received this note today about 3-on-3 saying that I was championing the first presentation that came before the board or the plan commission 3 years ago, and I was championing the second one, and now I'm involved in the third one. I had nothing to do with the first proposal at all. I never even attended a village board meeting, met the owners, had anything to do with it. The second one, I acted solely as a broker for the purchaser of the property. I attended the meetings out of interest on the process, but I never testified publicly. When I saw an opportunity to put 2 contiguous owners on this site together and was able to bring in a local developer from Lake Forest with a track record of success and a great reputation, I wanted very much to be involved, because as a resident, I've seen nothing happen. And I think the comment that Deb Fisher made earlier today is very true. What's happened in the last 4 years? Nothing. And I think a lot of the decisions that were made 4 years ago were based on the idea that a white knight was going to come forward with a 2-story plan. And it hasn't happened. Peter Whitmer has told me he can't do it. It doesn't make any financial sense to build a 2-story building. So I think if this doesn't go forward, J.B. Weiler's suitor, and I'm not representing J.B. as a leasing agent, but he has a pizza restaurant that wants to open there. And I think that's just the wrong path for the village from a planning perspective to go down.
So I've got a procedural question about something you just brought up, because does the village board, let's say we hash through this. Let's say we have some sort of consensus, or maybe not, but we have some thoughts on how we feel about this. I'm not convinced that helps you at all as an applicant. Unless, is the board going to comment on this? Are they going to have this as their agenda and make public comment related to our comments from a workshop perspective to say, yeah, we think we're on board with this text amendment thing? Otherwise, what kind of,
The village
our
board-
comments on our,
The village board-
excuse me, I'd like some feedback more from the staff here in that they're trying to say to themselves, do we go down this path of applying for a text amendment and doing a special, a PMD development? I get it. It gets expensive. But what I don't understand is the village board does want to hear our thoughts on this, right? That's great. But unless they provide feedback to say, yeah, we're on board with that, how does that help the applicant to know whether they should go down that path or not? I guess I just don't see any clarity from you to you based on our thoughts.
I mean, David, I think you're exactly, this is my central point, which is if we think that this is a good idea, the right way to do it is recommend a text amendment stripping away the three-story prohibition.
Right.
Send that to the village board for approval. That basically green lights your proposal. You send it in, and then we debate a PMD, which requires all the additional planning. But again, to me, that feels like us making a political judgment instead of a technical judgment. And I find it odd that, let's contrast this to the village board's approach on recreational cannabis retailing in Lake Bluff, where they instructed us, basically, that their view was they didn't want to do it, and they didn't do it, which is entirely their right. They're our elected representatives. They did exactly what they have the responsibility to do, which is to vote their point of view on a particular issue. In this case, they're basically saying, hey, what do you guys think? What I think is this is a really tough issue that there's no consensus in the village on, and so it's our elected representatives' responsibility. And by the way, we don't have constituents, right? We're an advisory board. We weren't elected by anybody. We're all just appointed and sitting up here. So people who do have constituents, I think, owe us very explicit guidance. We're ready to repeal the two-story amendment, send it in. And that doesn't have to be a binding action. They could say that at their next open meeting, and I think it would give us more clear guidance.
Yeah, I agree. Otherwise, I think we're trying to tell you something that is.
We don't have the power to do it.
There's nothing there. It's empty.
Could we basically turn back the clock 4 or 5 years, however many years it was, and repropose the PMD ordinance the way that we originally drafted it, without the 30 feet restriction, and just say?
Yes, that's what I'm saying you could do.
Okay, so, yeah, I'd like to do that, because I think that this decision needs to be made before these guys spend any more money, right? And I understand the difficulty they would have of making that decision in a vacuum, right? Which is one reason why, if they voted it with this proposal sitting out there, they would have we'd have still the same ability to get concessions, right? Just not having the 30-foot restriction doesn't give up our ability to request and get my water control issue resolved, for example, as I understand it. But it would be putting the cart behind the horse where it belongs, it seems. Because I don't think we can give them the certainty that we need to give them.
We can't.
We cannot at all.
We can't.
That's,
Listen, you guys, whatever you guys decide here, we fully understand that the village board ultimately makes the decision, whether you're in favor of it or not.
Yeah.
But if you all tell me tonight, even if a text amendment were changed, I still wouldn't be in favor of a three-story structure, that's enough for me to say, I think the village board has enough confidence in the plan commission that we probably wouldn't come through. I think you guys are charged with making recommendations to the board, and then they make a decision. Now, they didn't agree with your decision on legalized marijuana, and
But we're not making any recommendations.
That's their-
We're not making any recommendations to the board right now. They don't want to, that's not the
workshop.
purpose of a workshop. It's to give you feedback. That's it.
The feedback we're giving, at least I'm giving, it sounds like David.
I mean, I think I've heard some really good feedback.
It's just a weird situation we're in, which is the board's asking us to recommend to do something. I think your point is that, right, if you want to go down that path, do you just say, have the staff draft an amendment that a text amendment that repeals the three-story prohibition?
we'll just send the old one, the one we did 4 years ago, back in. This,
Just one half dozen of the other.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the course to do
Which,
what he's asking.
and with this proposal in front of him, I'm inclined to do that. With this proposal, with the, I'm inclined to say, this is a political decision that the board needs to make. I think we have a proposal that we should not just shut down. That's with people who are working with the neighbors. So that's the point I think we're at.
I think, from what I'm hearing, is that there's a lot more wiggle room than 3 years ago on this board. We're listening, there's more positives towards this project than there were, especially people who are neighbors. So I feel that if we went to the next level, this would get a lot more heated than it already is, which is pretty heated now, and we'll probably see petitions and so forth. So I'm in agreement with everybody else who's spoken here that before you go forward, I think we should send them, and I don't know if we can send a request to the board that we've been talking about that states, we are interested in pursuing this project, not approving it, but pursuing this project if the board is willing to change the text amendment. Can we do that? Otherwise, I don't see us going forward with this, for all the reasons we've spoken.
So, I mean,
Can we apply for a text
you
amendment?
can. Yes, you can.
Direct us to do that.
You can direct, and this body has authority to apply for that text amendment. That then you would do a public hearing before this body and send a recommendation to the village board, and it's their decision. It's the same way as any applicant can submit an application for a text amendment as well, and then go through the process, and that can be done.
See, I see, before they invest more money, that's, maybe we should hold a public hearing, listen to these same people talk again with the same thoughts. Maybe a few will change their minds. And just do, yes, we're going to think about doing a text amendment, and we recommend a text amendment for this property. If
Yes.
it goes through at that point, after the public hearing, goes to the board, they approve it, then come back here with your PMD.
That's what makes sense to me. Especially given
If we
the
can do
notion that we aren't letting the, well, holds barred, everything's not, we get another terrible proposal as a result, and we have to approve it because we've let this one metric go. What I'm hearing is we still have all of the discretion. We just don't have this, arbitrary or not, we just don't have this black line rule on the 30 feet.
So that's one point that I guess I just have trouble squaring, which is I don't like the idea that we're sitting here saying we have to approve a proposal in front of us because we may not get another one. Because what it basically suggests is that the village board was wrong in adopting the three-story ban because it prohibits economically rational development of this lot. And maybe that is what some people believe. I mean, I'm not there yet in terms of really believing that. But if that's really what we're saying, then it takes us right back to where we were before, which is do the text amendment, move it on, have the conversation, and like you said, have a true public hearing with an actual proposal in front of people that, the village government process can work and people can really speak their minds.
I'll just put a caveat on that. I think to have the kind of quality project that we're talking about, I think with known quantities, that may not come back again. I don't know.
I have no idea.
And I think it doesn't mean that the board was wrong 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago. It means that 4 years is a long time to have a property sit empty. And there's no indication that it's going to get better.
There's never been a better time to hold property. Interest rates are very, very low. I mean, there is an argument, and I think, again, I'm not saying I agree with it one way or another, but there is a valid argument that people are making, which is that the developer's holding out for a better deal. And that's totally their right. That is their right. And there's nothing anybody should say about that. If this is a better deal, they should do it. But it's tough, the situation they're in, because the cap has been placed on the market, right? Literally, in terms of height that they're able to develop. And we're being asked to decide whether or not
Well, this is the
that should be
third,
overruled.
except for the 1 2-story development, this is possibly the third time we've dealt with the third story, or is this the second time?
So in total, a little bit of history. So there have been three-story proposals on Block 3, say that 3 times. There was the, I forget the name, the something punch proposal, like I can picture it.
I just wanted to,
Yeah.
so we've had three developers come by in 4 years to offer 3 different proposals of 3 stories. I mean, to me, that seems like that's the going rate now for this property. Though if it'll change, then we'll let the property sit for another couple of years. But is that beneficial to the village?
Yeah.
Do we bite the bullet and accept the fact that some people are going to be very upset, and some people will be very happy, and a developer will make some money, and we move on? But we need that text amendment approved that we can go forward with this, and then we can debate the pros and cons of this development. So that's what I would propose.
If I may, just to get clarity, back in 2016, and I don't know, Glenn, you weren't with us then, I don't believe, but Ben was. Where were we procedurally when the village council took the initiative to put the 30-foot and 2-story restriction in place?
Yeah, had this body made a recommendation?
I don't think we had.
Yeah, so I can tell you, at least this, I was not present for this, of course, I've reviewed this. Yeah, so this body made a recommendation, I believe it was 5-1 or 6-1, to recommend the creation, of the PMD tool. There was no height restriction included at that time.
Right.
The only.
And then the board amended it of their own volition.
Yes.
Right, they didn't, to be clear, they didn't amend the ordinance, rather, when the draft went to them, they added it in. They thought it was prudent.
Sorry, they amended the draft.
Right.
Yes.
So is their
They marked it up.
Right.
So it's their responsibility to redo the draft?
Yeah.
Unamended? Or re-amended?
Re-amended.
And the village board sent me back here because they wanted you to judge this on its own merits and not on a previous decision.
Not even give us more.
If I'm hearing the consensus, it sounds like we have here, what I would recommend is this. It sounds like we're splitting these issues up between the 3-story limit and the plan for development, were that to change, that's fine, we can do that. If your direction is that we should bring you a text amendment in January to recommend to the village board, we can do that. What I would encourage you to do, and I don't mean to be cyclical, but these workshops take time. It takes a lot of time for people to come here and hear them. So if there are other responses to the plan, this is still a good time to air those.
Okay, water.
We can
I'm
still
all about
proceed
water.
procedurally in the manner that you direct us to.
Uh-oh, here comes the board. Speaker of the board. Speaker for the board.
The boss.
Are you hearing this?
I am. I guess I'd like to punctuate what Glenn just offered, in that the boards encourage you all to evaluate this project, and they want to know your opinion. So if your opinion is they should amend the code, they want to hear that. If your opinion is they don't think you should amend the code, then they would like to hear that as well. I think they want you to review this project, consider it based off the planning principles that have been adopted and recommended by this body over time, as it reflects, is it in harmony with the comprehensive land use plan? Does it meet the planning principles? How does that size up and square up against those standards that have been established in the code? But that's what they're asking. You are an advisory body, and you're not elected. And so you answer to the.
Aware of that.
Right. You answer to the board necessarily, right? I mean, that's who appoints you all. Yeah. So they want your unbiased, unvarnished opinion. So that's fine. I can imagine how they'd want it. What's actionable about it? So what? So they hear it. You're in a position.
How does that help the applicant? How does that give anybody any clarity? The board hears it, thank you very much, they got it in the back of their head, but what happens?
Yeah.
I think your opinions are always very well respected at the village board. That's why you sit there.
That's fine, but what does that help the applicant? How does that help anybody to move forward?
The applicant probably answer.
I feel confident, personally, having sat on the plan commission, that if rational thought and reason is put into a recommendation to the village board, they'll consider it. They won't necessarily approve it, and they certainly won't give me any assurance that if you tell me this is a great project, that they'll approve it, because I'll have to go to the village board. But they want to know what you think about this proposal based on what's been presented, how it's been changed, and the input from the neighbors.
I believe that happened unanimously a couple months ago. We unanimously, it was a vast majority that recommended the cannabis laws to the board, and I believe they unanimously went the opposite direction. So I'm just not convinced. I really don't know what that looks like. So I just don't want to put you in a tough position.
I appreciate that.
We can give you,
But
we
what
can
I
give you
really
lots of
don't want is you
feedback.
to spend 6 figures really taking this plan to the next level, and we get reversed.
Yeah.
Because what happens from here is, and again, I'm keeping my own personal view on how I would vote on a text amendment aside, but this will unleash another wave of no 3-on-3. It's going to motivate a lot of passions, and those passions are going to go to our elected representatives. And so what you're kind of, if we greenlit you and said, we're game, let's do it, we're going to mark this up, we're going to send a recommendation in, and you spend, I don't know, how many tens of thousands of dollars and all these man hours to do it, and then we get overruled again, I mean,
If you get overruled again, that's my fault. You know,
No, it's
that's the
but it's
risk.
also a tremendous waste of our time and the time of the people of the village. And that's, I think, the issue that you're hearing here, which is that there's a degree of frustration with, they adopted a specific rule, and now they're asking us if they should overrule themselves.
So based on the,
Different-
excuse me a
different
second.
board.
Based on the rules as they are now, we tell the board this is not a go. It's easy. What we're asking is some direction from the board that says if we decide that this project is a go, are they willing to extend the height of the building rather than the other way around? Because there's a lot of time and effort spent on this board to come up with a decision.
If they'll answer that question, I think we're happy with it, aren't we?
So if this board says, yeah, we're kind of interested in doing that, seeing the project, but we need direction from the board saying they're willing to make that commitment as well.
But Drew's asked another question, which
Yeah, I know.
I think we should try to answer, but I think we have answered it, which is generally meets planning principles, meets general objectives set forward in the plan, you know,
Well,
a
we
lot
are
of attention.
interested in it.
A lot of attention paid on landscaping, no water abatement details and more green space, but
Water's important.
Water is important.
it's a generally constructive proposal. It's just not legal.
Right. So, yeah, I'd like to
Minor
work with you on it.
technicality.
I'd like to work with you on it.
That's
like
what
the
I wanna hear.
concept. Right, but at this point, we can't. So,
Okay.
So where does that leave us at the moment?
So am I hearing that you're going to, Gary, request that the board make some comment or decision on a text amendment to the underlying ordinance?
Can we ask the board to take, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
No, it's-
we need to discuss this amongst commissioners. Is it possible to ask them to make an advisory vote? Can the village council pass a non-binding resolution?
So you could ask, you could ask them to express,
The sentiment of the House?
right, their opinion, yes, you can, and it's up to them. I don't know what they do it or not, but you can certainly ask. You can ask them to submit an application for a text amendment. You can submit an application for a text amendment. You can ask.
I think you hit it on.
You
number
can, you
two
can
there.
ask the applicant to submit an application for a text amendment before doing the whole PMD.
But then he's
All
answering
I'm
his
saying
own
you
issue.
have, all I'm saying is you have many options,
All
and.
right, I
yeah.
move that we ask the board to apply for a text amendment.
So why would they apply and we wouldn't?
Well, because they'd have to vote to apply, which is basically getting them on record as saying they want it,
I know, but
or at least interested.
as opposed to it going the other way.
they have asked for our, I don't know, I thought we made recommendations, so that seems something that we would make a recommendation on.
We make a recommendation based on when we have an application. We don't have an application, it's a workshop.
That's right.
So I think we should ask the board to apply. And if they apply, then we can debate it and we either vote it up or vote it down.
It shows,
So
that-
as-
it shows that it's of interest to them. Maybe not necessarily that they want to do it, but they're
Yeah.
at least interested in going through the process.
Exactly. Formally,
as
rather
a-
than just on an advisory basis.
Yeah. As a practical matter, just thinking about the timing, the calendar of this, so the next time the village board meets would be January 13th. So the earliest you could hold a public hearing would be February 19th. The applicants, we've indicated that the applicant wouldn't get feedback on their plan until after that's adopted, so now we're talking March 23rd. You couldn't apply then for April, now we're into May. I mean, there's some hurdles here.
It's a month delay, right? It's a month delay, because what we could do is ask you to draft a text amendment tonight. We could actually make that request. You'd draft it and you'd give it to us on our next meeting, which is on January.
That would be January 15th.
January 15th.
Or they just go and do it themselves
15th.
with whatever we say to them, which, I don't know, in our opinion, I don't think is worth much.
But my point is, it's a month delay. If a month delay causes the project to blow up, it probably wasn't a good project.
If that's how you want to go forward with it, we're okay with that. A month's a month, right? So.
My point is, the debate, this first level debate, I think at the village council will be pretty lively. So let's let that debate happen at the place where it should happen before we waste the petitioner's time and take up another whole meeting on this board.
There won't be a public hearing, we conduct the public hearings, Jim.
Oh, no, I mean, if we request this text amendment, the village board meeting in January will become where people show up to voice their opinions on this matter.
Yeah, I don't know if do they have the right?
What do you mean?
I mean,
You can just show up in the public comment period.
Yeah, we conduct the public hearings.
No.
Yeah.
So at the village board meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, if we basically request them, pass the buck is exactly what it is. But if we vote to request that the village board submit an application, that goes to them, it'll be on the agenda for the village board meeting, and the public can show up at the village board meeting and speak about.
Just the same as
So-
they are now, subject to
So what you-
the discretion of the chair.
It's only to apply.
It's only to
Then
apply.
it comes
Apply.
back
They're
to
not
us.
making
Then
any
it comes back to us.
The only decision there is, do they apply or not?
Do they apply or not? But that is the question, because then the 3-on-3 crowd will show up and say don't. The crowd who are in favor of it will say do, and the village board makes a decision.
Well, and it still has to go through the process as to
Yeah.
whether it eventually gets approved. It may still go through, and the village board, after 3 months, may say, no, we don't want to amend that, we don't want to go through.
They'll reserve that right until the very end.
Exactly, but it goes through the process, but they've already given some level of, I'll call it interest, or level of listening to this, or going through the process.
So just a couple things, just procedurally, so how this would work. So number one, you can request that the village board do it. You don't have the authority to place it on their agenda.
Right.
Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, under the Open Meetings Act, what's on your agenda tonight is a workshop. So, in terms of a formal vote, there's really no formal vote to take. Rather, what you can do is do a straw poll and express your opinions and ask and request that's either the staff or the chair or, whatever it may be, expresses your opinion to the village board. That would be, I think, the appropriate procedural step. It is then within their discretion, whether the village board to consider it and what to do with it. But that's under the Open Meetings Act, and also in terms of what authority this body has. You can certainly, though, again, a straw poll vote, and say, we'd like to, by the straw poll express, and ask staff to express our voice. That's perfectly appropriate.
So we could do a straw poll saying either we approve or don't, or we are in favor of them considering this or not.
Asking them to apply.
But are we also, without opining on this particular project? Because I think what Drew was saying was that they want us to pay some attention to the particular project. So I'm wondering if we could say, maybe not everybody is ready to say this, but this project looks worth pursuing. Maybe we could say that.
Or not,
Or not.
however you feel about it.
So we're happy to go through the process. We'd like to ask you to apply for an amendment to the ordinance to start this off. But if we have consensus that the project is worth considering, and so the time is of the essence. It seems like that might be part of the straw poll, or no? No? Or is that too much to ask?
You can put in your straw poll anything you want. I
Yeah.
mean, it's,
Can I add on that point from Member Ryder? I think that's something that, again, the board is looking for. But also, I think out of the respect of the people who sit here and go to these meetings, one of the things I hear from residents who call me or say, should I come to this meeting? I've got only so much time in my life. You heard people, I had to come here to this meeting and then leave because I have to go to other obligations. So people here and spend this much time and sit for 2 hours, they're going to want they want to know what you think about it too, right? But the board certainly does. So I just like to add, that's a common refrain that I hear is that people attend meetings, they spend a lot of energy trying to plan for them, and so I think it's helpful to be respectful of their time as well. So.
So do we need
Two straw polls.
What's the second? I know the first, what's the second?
It's sort of, what's our disposition toward this particular project?
That one's
do we-
clear, yeah.
And then the second one is to request that they,
Oh, I see.
apply for a text amendment.
Okay.
And I
got
think
it.
the both are necessary because why are we asking for them to do that now as opposed to a year from now if this project is irrelevant? I think this project they need our thoughts on it and they've asked for it. So maybe 2 straw polls. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think the consensus is to go with the 2 straw polls. Number one, the general attitude toward the merits of this particular proposal. Certainly, it's not binding. And the second issue would be whether or not to recommend that the village explore a possibility of a text amendment to the current ordinance. Before we get into that, though, I guess I would like to thank the public generally and thank thank Mr. Anderson and Mr. Whitmer for excellent presentations, excellent engagement, professionalism, and certainly civility. I think we've had a great dialogue tonight. We had a great dialogue in November. And as we work our way through this process, and it's a critical process, it helps all of us as committee members, and it will help the village council at some point probably reach a decision. But I think everybody should be commended, especially during this time of year when time is even more of the essence. So, in any event, with respect to the first straw poll, I guess which would be general attitude toward the feasibility or viability of this proposal, maybe we'll just go commissioner by commissioner and indicate your general position and/or concerns.
I think it's worthy of continuing through the process. I think it's something that has potential, so I'm generally favorable of the concept.
Thank you.
I'm definitely in favor of it, and as well as working alongside you for compromises and understanding and developing it further. So I would be in favor of it.
Thank you.
I too would be in favor of it.
Again, I made some very specific comments earlier about things like green space, about things like really listening to the neighbors in terms of light cone and what impact you're actually having, green fence, lots of work still to be done on the details, but wearing our development board hat, this is along the lines of what the village wants. So I think it should be discussed more fully.
Thank you.
And finally, I just note that in the letter from Mackey Consultants, there's a note that the proposed development is classified as a minor development, therefore stormwater detention and runoff volume reduction are not required. However, what I see here is that you're paying close attention to that, and I will continue to pay close attention to that. I think any ideas that we have about green space on the roof would be very helpful, and on the second floor where there was going to be bulk and now we're not proposing bulk anymore, garden area would be terrific. With that in mind and your willingness to compromise, I'd be in support.
With respect to and I appreciate the comment, with respect to the water, the reason we engaged the engineer came out of the comments from the neighbors directly behind the property, one of which had an issue with water infiltration years ago. and we assured them we would go above and beyond what's
That's what I like.
required to make sure that's not an issue in the future.
I think you can help, I think the project could, I'm a dreamer, could help more broadly with stormwater problems that we're having in the east side, so,
Thank you all.
and we ought to aspire to that.
I guess I would echo the positions taken by the various commissioners. I would just want to emphasize, Mr. Whitmer and Mr. Anderson, that number one, the critical issues from my perspective are probably at the height and the impact on the daylight plane from the perspective of the north side neighbors. I think when you look at a proposal like this from street side, from the library side, you're not going to notice it. It's not going to have an impact. But the concessions that you have proposed certainly are a significant step in the right direction, because you're trying to work with them to offset that potentially negative impact on their backyards or whatever. Yeah, so it's height. It's not the 3 stories. It's just the general height issue from my perspective. And I guess we also should probably incorporate by reference Member Russell's comments via email.
Okay.
As to the second straw vote, I believe that it's categorized as whether or not we should encourage the village council to explore a possible text amendment, I believe is the way we're phrasing it.
I think we're a little bit more formal than that, or I would suggest if we really want an outcome that we want, we try to pin them down a little bit more than that. I think we should formally request that they apply for a text amendment if they want us to proceed.
Okay.
And if they vote to do it and we vote to recommend the text amendment, then the whole thing just moves along and.
Right, without these guys
And if
spending
not,
any
we're
more
done
money.
and these guys haven't spent another dollar.
All right.
I mean, that's fine with me, Jim, so.
And I'm just going to make a comment to that before I think this is actually a critical part that they do that, regardless of what the applicant does, because I think it's a policy question. I don't think it's a specific proposal, because if they don't do it and this applicant walks away, the next time somebody else wants to come in 3 years or whenever it is, we're going to have the same exact issue. They need to get ahead of this and say, from a policy perspective, are we changing course? And are we saying that we want to consider something and do it yes or no? And so I think, I feel strongly that I'm in favor of them doing this.
Thank you. Ms. Dan?
I totally agree.
Ray?
Agree.
I have a question. So if they were to do that, and then these guys, I don't know, if somebody came in and undercut them somehow, or maybe bid more on the properties, or, could we get a third party out here, not these guys with this reasonable compromise approach? A third party could show up. We'd still have the same kind of position that we currently have to demand attention to the neighbors' positions. That wouldn't alter by virtue of having no absolute deadline on the two stories, right? We'd still have that kind of input.
I think I know what you're getting at. Can I try to?
Please,
phrase this?
go ahead.
If we make this is a legal question. If, under the village process, if we recommend a text amendment stripping away this prohibition on 3 stories and the height restriction, and then this proposal falls apart, but it does so after the village board has adopted that text amendment, I believe the answer is we are giving up that safety latch, right? Because now it's of right under PMD terms. They don't have to comply with.
Well, that's not quite right.
Okay. Please.
So under the code, the provision that's at issue is in 10-15-3C, and it's titled Maximum PMD Height. No building or structure in any PMD shall exceed 30 feet in height, nor shall any building or structure in any PMD exceed 2 stories. So so that just restricts in terms of what the PMD relief is. So if somebody wanted to apply, so if that was stripped away, somebody
Yes.
could apply for a PMD that exceeds the 30 feet in height. That, however, is not as of right.
As of right, excuse me.
No,
You're
right,
correct.
but just
It
to
would be under
clarify.
the PMD.
So then they could apply for a building that is higher, seeking an exception to the code to, the general height restrictions or whatnot, and can seek a building that is in excess of 30 feet, but they would have to meet the standards for a PMD.
Exactly.
And so it would still come back to this body for recommendation, the village board for approval of a PMD.
Exactly. So I think the perception out there might be that by voting out this restriction, all holds, are off. Like everybody, it's a free-for-all on Block 3, and that's not the case. I just want to make that clear. We're asking them to consider that so that we can consider this proposal fully or not, right? So, yes, I also agree that we ought to ask them to decide to apply for an amendment to that ordinance, and therefore know more fully what our restrictions are when we're considering this proposal on its merits.
And I would concur with that recommendation. Anything further from the workshop's perspective with respect to CBD tonight? And thank you so much, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Whitmer, for your patience and also for the patience of the
Thank you all for
public.
your time and consideration. I understand. And this is almost as painful as the impeachment hearings.
No.
Conflicted. Oh, this doesn't go.
Yeah.
It's gonna heat up, though. It's gonna.
When the dates.
No,
we
it's
have,
April
uh,
15th will be Passover.
We still have to go through that.
They said the 22nd.
Are we gonna wrap up?
Yeah, we're going
I
to
see what that means.
just go into recess for 5 minutes.
That's the
probably.
alternate.
I appreciate
Go into recess?
So there was a couple of things
That's wonderful.
that Glenn had asked me to address to all of you that we were going to talk about.
Let's
And
charge
Glenn
ahead.
has something. You may want to take a minute to let people.
Let's motor. It's 10:45,
And
or not 10:45. My watch is still on
10:45.
East Coast. I'm still on East Coast time.
Just say what happened.
It's almost 10 o'clock.
Make progress? Covered a lot of ground.
Democracy.
I tell you, or do we have to make a proposal? I need the date moved, because I'm not gonna be here. If it's just
Oh.
me, I'm not gonna, I would like it moved.
More than just you have raised the issue, so I'm trying to be more.
I appreciate it. This is okay, Hanukkah's okay.
Yeah, so I've got April 15th as the third Shabbat, is that it?
Oh, it's the third night of Hanukkah?
The third pair,
I mean,
right?
it is.
The
What's the
second
first
is April 9th, 10th, and then the one, I guess, the intermediate.
Oh, you know what?
is in 15, 16.
That works.
Yeah, we're set.
That's the end of the holiday, I'm not interested, as long as it's not the first 2 nights.
Oh, okay.
Then I'm good.
Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, let's see, agenda item number 8, staff report, meeting dates for 2020.
Sure. So as you can see in front of you, customarily, we try to give you a list of meeting dates for the coming year. We announce these in your behalf as required by the Open Meetings Act. Something that's come up a few times in my tenure and that I made my New Year's resolution this year, I'm still crossing off the list, is that we could be a bit more considerate of the Jewish high holidays and how we schedule these things. From time to time, these pose trouble for our applicants, our commissioners, and so on. So the 2 dates with red text next to them, based, as an uninformed person working off of a calendar, your regular meeting date would be in conflict. The dates listed in parentheses are available dates where you could reschedule and avoid a conflict, both, where the room's available and so on.
So the red means that it has been rescheduled, so, that it will.
If this group's supportive of it, we will move, for example, the April 15th meeting to Wednesday, the 22nd. We'll move the December 16th meeting.
I see,
to
okay.
Monday, the 21st.
I got it.
Fully supportive.
Yes, I am as well.
I'm fully supportive, even though the 22nd I can't go, attend, but I like the idea. I think we should be certainly respectful.
I'm the only one on the board who it really matters to, and it doesn't matter to me, these dates.
Okay.
So unless it's an applicant or something like that, but we wouldn't know that until, that month, whoever comes before the board.
But I think as a matter of general principle, it's common courtesy.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I understand
We
that.
should, let's just do it.
These are for us, non-important dates.
Well, they were bold in my little chart.
I appreciate that. I wish more people in town
It's not
heard
Yom,
about that.
it's not Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah.
That's not the first 2 nights of Passover. Those are the big 3, right?
That is correct.
That's right, you're the only other one on the board.
I'm not on the board, but.
Hey, Ben,
But
for many
appreciate
forms
that.
of
But you are right,
expertise.
the dais, but yes.
Should we move the December meeting earlier?
No, we don't have to do anything.
Oh, just leave it?
You want to, we can, if you guys are,
Well, I don't know about December for Ben, but it's okay.
I'm looking at
Is that the first night of Hanukkah?
the first night of Hanukkah in 2020 is December 10th.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
If you want to move it to the 21st. You got little kids, so you may want.
don't base it on me.
Okay. So it's not the first night of anything, we're good. I'm good.
so I'm hearing, don't move them.
Don't have to move in front of my account.
I think then I'd leave them.
It's a year from now, we can schedule.
We'll keep them where they
Sure,
are.
they
They
can
can always
adjust
move
it.
around.
People want to move it, move it.
Excuse me, Commissioners report? You need a motion.
I have a question. Let's do this first.
Yeah, I had a couple little things on staff report. I know we all want to get home. There has been another survey since 1997. I'll send it out to you guys. I'll send you a couple other
The
bits of trivia.
94.
94 survey for the 97 comp plan, yeah. So it's not as directly engaged with that question. I think you'll find it insightful. We'll circulate it later. Ben, I know you had at least one item.
Yes. So one of the questions that Mr. Cole asked me to address, because I know he's received the question from, I think, a couple of you, is just making sure that everybody understands the kind of what we would call is the ex parte communication rule, and what your role is in terms of feedback from the community when you have it, when people want to talk to you, people want to correspond with you. So for some of the decisions that we make when we're dealing with special uses, plan developments, variations, under the Illinois case law, it's been established that a lot of our proceedings are quasi-judicial. What that means for non-attorneys is that there's certain due process rights that applicants have, certain members of the public have, and that triggers certain obligations, including it's generally not a great idea to have what's called ex parte communications, meaning communications directly with an applicant, or for that matter, members of the public wishing to provide you testimony for a public hearing. So let's break that down even further on what that really means. We cannot prevent somebody from communicating with you. If a resident wants to send you an email, you can't stop it. But the best thing to do is, tell that person, or if somebody wants to stop you in the supermarket, say, hey, on this topic, that's going to come before you, here are my thoughts. I'm opposed to it, I'm for it, whatever it may be. Or if an applicant, I think you should vote for it, this is a great idea. The best thing to do is just tell them, say, thank you for your feedback. I can only consider, information that's provided at the hearing. Please come to the hearing and provide your feedback. We would love to hear it. And you can be nice about it, but that's the best thing to do. Second is, if you get emails, send them to staff. Staff can then include them in the packet, and it becomes part of the record. And the reason it's important is that the public has a right to know what the applicant's saying to you and to respond and provide their testimony. And vice versa, if the public is providing you comments, the applicant has due process rights to be able to rebut it and say, oh, that's not true, or that information, or I don't agree with that information, and here's why. So I know what happens, you're in an impossible situation in a small town. People are going to come to you, and again, the best thing is just very respectfully ask them to come to these hearings, because then it's before you, and it's the best way to handle it. And I don't know if anybody has any further questions on that, but.
And we're restricted amongst ourselves to to not talk beyond one person? Is that the plan?
Well, that's a separate issue. So that's really a due process issue is what I've talked about with ex parte communication. Now, in communications with yourselves, that's really a separate issue, which is the Open Meetings Act. So under the Illinois Open Meetings Act, whenever you have a majority of a quorum who's having what's called a contemporaneous communication, it has to be properly noticed, and it has to be a public meeting. So 2 of you can talk together. If there's 3 of you, you cannot communicate with each other contemporaneously.
About public business.
About public business. Certainly by other things, you certainly can. But about public business of this body, we need to have it obviously noticed for a meeting. So nothing prevents one of you from calling the other and, and talking about a matter, debriefing after a meeting. That's perfectly allowed by law. It's just if there's 3 of you, you can't. So, and if you do want to talk about something with multiple people, perfectly appropriate, ask Glenn to put it on the agenda, and then we can discuss it at a meeting, and it can be here. And during commissioners' report, on our agenda, we always have a placeholder. If there's any topics you want to bring up, it doesn't, as long as we're not voting on it, you can bring it up at commissioners' report. What do you think on this? Oh, I think this, I think that. Perfectly appropriate and legal. But that's an Open Meetings Act issue.
One more silly question. What if someone wants your opinion? They don't want to give you theirs, but they want my opinion. They say, hey, Dave, what do you think about this?
So,
Just respectfully say, I can't talk about it?
Well, remember that it's a quasi judicial proceeding. It's kind of like going to a judge outside of the chambers and saying, this case that's going to come before you, tell me what you're going to do. The best thing to do is to say, look, I can't make any determinations. I'm not going to formulate my opinion until I hear everything that's presented to us in a public hearing. And based on that hearing and that testimony and evidence that were presented, we'll make our decision.
Okay.
So, it's best to preserve that. And, and it can be hard, I know.
I hear
but
that.
yeah,
No,
but
it's good.
It's
Good
the
idea.
safest thing to do. And I will also finally add that the law on this, in terms of the case law, if you really want to get into the weeds on it, it's not always crystal clear. There are certainly cases that talk about the due process rights and so forth at meetings, but we don't want to also give somebody an opportunity to raise an issue when it can be avoided.
Question. Excuse me, I'm talking.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, I apologize.
All this paper, and a lot of it is redundant because the same people is going to send the same paper the next time. What do you need to do with it? Should we just hold it, or you just, what do you?
So what
I
we'll-
hate to waste all this.
Yeah, what we can do, and it depends what you have to refer to on paper. Most likely with
Most of
this
the
issue,
comments.
we keep a running folder of the comments. We keep that in a shared file, and we'll probably just start linking that from
But
here
then we
on
have to
out.
print it up again, is what I'm saying, and it's only a.
We probably wouldn't include paper copies of what you have there from here on out. We'd probably just include the new stuff. But we'd always give you the link if you want to see the entire.
Okay, fine.
drawings.
Okay, I just didn't want to.
And remember, when it's also online, so if we have a public hearing, let's say goes 3 meetings, you can always look at the previous
I
stuff.
understand that, I just didn't
Yeah.
want this to come back to us each
Got
meeting.
it, got it.
Another piece of paper.
Our sustainability committee thanks you.
Save the trees.
10 more seconds. Next month, the only application I'm aware of is the Lawrence Pub has indicated that they'll most likely apply shortly to proceed through that variation and special use permit and so on. I would also mention, we'll circulate some more information later, but as you may have gathered from Rick Lesser's comments, Stonebridge is back on the community's agenda. That developer has submitted an application to demolish the manor house, the carriage house, some parts of that landscape. That issue is not before this committee for the foreseeable future. It may become so, depending on what path that takes. Again, in the interest of time, we'll circulate a note explaining that in more detail. That concludes our report.
Commissioners report?
That was the paper issue.
Mark, you wanted to approach? Yeah, one question, sure.
It really has to do with process. Let's say hypothetically, a developer was given access pre-submission to certain members of the PCZBA and ABR. Would that be appropriate?
I don't know if there's a particular situation. I'd have to have more facts,
Well, yeah, I mean,
so.
The same.
Could you please, can you please, these are all the
All
same
the same.
document.
Uh-huh.
These are all the same document. You pass that down. This is from 2016,
Oh,
and it involved proceedings of the PCZBA.
Is all the same?
Yeah, they're all the same.
I'm glad to know that my late nights completing FOIAs for you have not gone to waste.
And if anyone didn't get a copy,
Oh,
just a couple
okay.
more.
We have enough.
Okay. If I send too many, I apologize. Mr. Miller, I know there's too much paper already, so I apologize for giving you more than you need.
There's a recycling bin conveniently located right outside.
We're green.
Not to imply that your
We have a
document would go-
sustainability committee here in Lake Bluff, so I'm sure they'd be very happy to hear that. But, Mr. Schuster's comments here raised some issues of process, I think, that are kind of in the back of my head. And, they are some concerns that other members of the public harbored back in 2016 with regard to process. And I think that's why you saw some of the reaction you did in 2016 when it came to light that there was a meeting set up by the village government with certain members of the PCZBA and ABR during the pre-submission process. And the reason I raise this is to the point that Mr. Schuster raised. For something this significant and for something that will have such a potentially significant impact on the village, we hope that it's all done in the light of day with the maximum amount of transparency possible. I realize that at times, a resident who may need to look at modifications to his or her home may need to have discussions with village staff, just as a developer may need to have discussions with village staff about the, perhaps some technical details about a development. But I just hope that, this process will be a little different than it was in 2016, in that it's all for everyone to see in the light of day. Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.